I didn't get a chance to check the numbers on the latest slides.
I'll call the meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May I have the Statement of Compliance Open Public Meetings Act?
In compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of this meeting was provided by transmitting a copy of the meeting notice to the Madison Eagle and the Morris County Daily Record, posting a copy on the bulletin board at the main entrance of Borough Hall, and filing a copy in the office of the clerk all on January 20th, 2016. Copies of said notice were made available to members of the general public.
A roll call, please.
Mayor Conley.
Here.
Mr. Catalanello will be lead. Mr. Landrigan.
Here.
Mrs. Vitale.
Here.
Ms. Bailey.
Here.
Mr. Wolkowitz.
Here.
Mr. Rowe.
Here.
All right, agenda review. This is a budget meeting. And the items we'll be covering today will be review of the actual process, and then electric utility, water utility, a quick 5-year capital summary, the overall municipal budget, utility budgets and performance, power procurement, and then questions. And we'll have invitation for public, and as we go through, if there's appropriate times, for those that are watching at home, we'll pretend that the room is filled with public, but I know we have some public here. Hopefully we'll give you a chance to speak at home. This is being recorded so we can share it with the full town through Rosenet and on Cablevision and Fios.
Oh. Yeah, I'll start.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, all righty. What we're here to do tonight is to introduce what is the draft budget. It is by no means final yet. There's still a good deal of work to be done. This budget was done over the course of several months and as a result of the work of the borough administrator, the CFO, meetings with department heads. It actually began back in July when the administrators started meeting with the department heads. For the council, the budget process started in December with the first discussion on capital. Last Monday evening, we talked about the Open Space Trust Fund. Now, what you're going to hear a lot of talk tonight is capital. And as the department heads come up, we're going to address that point. Capital is driving a lot of this budget. It's going to drive, to a large extent, our reliance on the electric surplus. That will, in turn, drive our electric rate discussion. But in summary, this evening we're going to discuss the electric and water utility budgets. We're also going to discuss the municipal budget, which is the budget that funds the police, fire, public works, sewage processing, garbage pickup, and the operations of Borough Hall. Utility budgets and municipal budgets are separate, but are interconnected in many ways. Keep in mind, and I said this before, that this is a draft budget and will change based upon revised numbers and decisions made on council. Council does have some decisions to make, and I'm going to go back to the famous word again, capital. How much is the right amount of money for capital? How much utility surplus should we use to pay for municipal operations, and can we afford an electric rate cut? With that, I'd like to call up Jim Burnett, and he could actually start the actual presentation.
Thanks, Bob. The agenda, as we discussed, as you mentioned and the mayor mentioned, I don't think we need to repeat it. I'm just going to go real quick through the budget process in a little more detail. As Bob said, back in December, we talked about the 5-year plan. We talked about open space last week. Tonight's the initial budget review. Just last Friday, I submitted the annual debt statement, not directly connected to the budget, but important to that. February 8th, a week from this Monday evening, the department heads will be coming up. After that, we'll be submitting our unaudited annual financial statements. The AFS is an extremely important document. We haven't finalized it yet. That could cause some revisions to the numbers here this evening. February 22, we'll have a follow-up budget review, and with that, we'll be able to have the benefit of the numbers from the annual financial statement. After that, our hope is that council has a consensus on where to move forward on capital, on tax rates, on use of surplus and alike, and I'll be able to actually craft the actual state budget document. And then from there, the budget would be introduced at the council meeting on March 14th. That is the last regularly scheduled council meeting where we can introduce it and still stay on track for not losing any of our state aid due to the state best practices guidelines. So it's important for us to stay on track and introduce it at that time. And it does take a significant amount of time to craft it, so I would not want to be asked to have a council meeting on March 7th to make changes to the document and only be given a week to create it. It's just not feasible. From there, there has to be a 28-day waiting period between the introduction of the budget and the hearing and adoption of the budget. That's state mandate that gives residents the opportunity to go into the library, to go in Liz's office, to go online and see the budget document and be able to come and comment on that. So with that, we'll just talk just for a few seconds about the budget cycle, which I think everyone knows. We start with strategic planning, and we kind of go around in a circle. We may go around a couple of times like a merry-go-round. We're going to talk about capital, open space. We've already done that. We're going to talk about municipal budget and utilities this evening. Department operating will happen next week. And then we'll circle back around on February 22nd and probably go a complete lap around the track and discuss all the different options because they're all relate. So with that, I want to invite up Michael Piano, who's going to talk about the accomplishments of the electric utility. After that, we'll have water utility personnel here. Feel free to ask Michael any questions. We want to try to keep him to about 5 to 10 minutes at most. Same with water utility, about 5 to 10 minutes at most, so we can stay on track and go forward from there. So, Michael.
And what we'll do, obviously, we'll be in between each of the utilities, we'll have questions or comments from the council. After both utilities have presented, we'll allow some time for the public to ask questions or have comments.
Thank you, Mayor. It was quite a busy year, 2015, for us. We replaced secondary cables on 8 streets. We installed about 40 new poles, 20 new get-down guy installations, about 22 transformers. Take 1 or 2. I don't have an exact count in front of me. We installed 2 new pad mount transformers at the North Street pump station with the help of the water department and the sewer department with the installation of the conduits. And we installed the cable there as well. We had some emergency transformer replacements at Madison Green condos. Transformers that failed there one evening. Madison, Rolling Hill condos also, there was 3 or 4 transformers that were beginning to deteriorate. We ended up scheduling and having those replaced. 112 streetlight repairs, 22 new streetlight installations. We added new LED lights at Elmer Street parking lot. Repaired and rewired the underground feed system over here at the train station. Approximately 95 new service installations. And we continue to work on system reinforcement throughout town as we find the need to be. We also had some emergency repairs that we had to conduct at James Park Substation, and we're still awaiting equipment to come in. There's approximately a 10-week lead time before we can complete that repair. Questions on 2015? Nope. Our goals for 2016 are to replace the existing pole-top transformers that are at E-Well with a pad mount transformer. Currently, there's pole-top transformers that are contained inside of a fenced-in area. That was the way it was done years ago. That's way beyond its time. Again, we're waiting for the 15 kV bushings to be replaced at transformer at 4A in James Park Substation. Again, that's a 10-week lead time. Once we get them and get them in, we hopefully have the transformer back online. Currently, we're running on half the substation at James Park. Not the first time this has happened. The substation is designed to carry the entire load of the western half of town without on half the transformers. We're going to continue some work on the underground switchgear at Madison Avenue. We've got to replace pressure gauges on underground switchgear in the commercial district. Transformer replacements as needed. There's a new flagpole scheduled to go in up at James Park, and we're going to light that. I think Dave's guys are going to give us a hand putting that flagpole in. And again, continued system reinforcement, pole replacement throughout town as needed, street lights, additions, service replacements, street light repairs and upgrades. And we're going to begin this pilot program of the handheld meter reader and automated meter reading program. And the KRE project at Green Village Road School is going to be a big project this year. Want to discuss capital? Where are we at with that, Jim, for purchasing that automated system? We're still waiting to hear some feedback from our consulting engineer regarding the handheld automated meter reading system. Looking for competitive prices from other manufacturers. I'd like to get the installation of the conduits, cable, and light piers and lampposts from on Kings Road here from Prospect down to the KRE project. It would be the same lampposts and fixtures that we have throughout town, the commercial district, the Victorian-style poles. Both perimeter fencing at both of our substations need to be replaced. They're well beyond their time. The barbed wire that keeps people out is in severe deterioration. We also like to add a video surveillance system at both substations. Again, the E-well transformer, $30,000 to purchase that transformer. We're looking for about $125,000 for submersible transformer replacement in the commercial district. The transformers down in the commercial district are, some of them are rounding around 35, 40 years old. I doubt the new ones will last that long, but it's the way they built things. And the stairway at Kings Road Substation, again, it's deteriorating. It's a steel stairway. I'd like to replace that with an aluminum style stairway. It's an outdoor stairway. It gets pretty well beat up. Do you want to go into 2017 or the numbers into 27? Excuse me?
The reserve for the substation at the bottom, like 300,000.
Okay. As per the Utilities Study Committee and the Strategic Planning Committee, we've agreed upon a $300,000 amount to put in yearly for future substation repairs and actually replacing some of the transformers at James Park Substation, as well as the switchgear. And Bob had asked for $25,000 for signal actuators for the traffic intersections. For 2016.
Just had a quick question for you, or an observation. I'm noticing that a lot of the work that you're doing is underground work and real infrastructure work. Is it safe to say that Sandy, because she ripped down a lot of the overhead power lines, a lot of that replacement work was done then, and a lot of those overhead lines are effectively new?
A lot of it was done after Sandy,
Yeah.
but it's always an ongoing thing with us.
Correct, yeah.
So we're continually observing the system and see what needs to be done.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Is there a reason why we're replacing both trucks the same year? It seems like a fairly expensive thing, and it's going to suck up all of our capital for next year.
They were both purchased the same year.
No, I understand that, but
And they're on any bucket truck after a 10-year period needs to be rebuilt hydraulically.
okay.
And both of those trucks have been horrible trucks to use. The type of engine that came in those as a Caterpillar engine had more problems with those trucks breaking down. The environmental rules that have been placed on those trucks have caused us to have a lot of downtime. We were told we had to take them out on the highway to run them once a week. We take them out every couple of weeks. We've been towed in off the highway a couple of times because they literally just shut off.
Okay.
So besides them being at their life expectancy, I would not miss both of them going up the road. at the
I
same
understand
time.
that. It's just a challenge, because I'm assuming 10 years from now, another council is going to be looking at spending all the capital in 1 year on 2 trucks again.
Those are two of the most important pieces of equipment.
No,
that
I
the utility
don't
owns.
doubt it. Okay. The other question is, the money for the James Park, given what we've experienced the last couple of months, do you still feel comfortable that we're not going to need to do the project sooner rather than later? I mean, is 10 years still a good time horizon for that project?
I'm comfortable with that, and it may be a little sooner, but again, 300,000 is a good number.
Okay.
Not as if it's falling apart.
No, I understand that, but I don't think we expected we were going to be doing what we had to do this year either.
Right, but it's not, the fault that happened this year, the bus duct has been repaired. We did that in-house.
Okay.
The bushings are, I think they're about $7,000 for the bushings. Probably there's going to be some labor, outside contractors are going to assist in that, because if the bushings can be put in without lowering the oil level in the transformer, it's going to be a lot less expensive. If we in fact have to lower the level of the transformer to put the bushings in, there's a whole process to refill that transformer and pull vacuum on it to get all the air out of it. That's going to be a little more costly. But again, it's nowhere near hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And last, the automated meters, how many are we expecting to purchase for $35,000?
What was the number we agreed on, Jim? If 20, that's what I'm thinking about, 25 possibly. And we're going to try to install them in our largest commercial customers first. That's the data we really need to collect. It's not so much the residentials.
What's the startup cost then, Jim? Because $35,000 that's more than $1,000 a meter if you're only buying 25.
The handheld devices, the software, and everything
Okay.
else is in there. The large meters cost up to $500 that have the ability to track the data for the largest customers. The regular meter that Michael can put in that can still be read by the handheld is about $70. So once we get the infrastructure put in, we want to start doing, say, an entire street or the entire KRE development, so it's going to be $70 a meter.
I'm just going to skip ahead real fast and look at water, because I have another question about overall. I mean, we've collected $1 million for meter replacement. I didn't remember seeing us spending anywhere near that for between both the electric and water. At what point, are we still waiting for a report come March to tell us how we're going to proceed to spend that money? This is more for Jim.
Michael said we have two potential suppliers that we want to make sure we fully understand their system, because even though it's a small pilot program, if we continue to buy meters at $35,000 a clip for a couple of years during this pilot program, we're going to want to have a system that can eventually convert and fully migrate to an automated metering, a fully automated metering system as opposed to a handheld-driven system. So that's the decision-making that we're working on right now. And our consultants identified two potential suppliers, has quotes. We just need to sit down with them and go over it.
Yeah, thank you.
Ben?
Thank you. I have a somewhat overarching concern, not only for the electric utility, but really for all of our capital needs. And that is to try and smooth them out as much as possible so that we don't have big mountains and troughs. And the reason for that is the way we collect our revenue is pretty flat, right? So if we could match it up over time, it would make for I won't say easier job, but it would make for a more comfortable job of crafting these budgets year in and year out. I see in looking at yours, you have the $300,000, the reserve funding. Obviously, you got to do it, so there's nothing you can do there. The metering, I expect, if it works out, as you've indicated, that you won't. By 2020, you'll be spending a lot more than $35,000 because you'll be wholesale installing them, if not earlier. So it's not for now, but just as a general question, to be able to look at these expenditures and ask yourself, is there anything I could put off a year? Or is there anything that maybe I pay for partially toward the end of the year, pick up the rest in the following year, just in an effort, again, so that we don't go from 895 to 475 in 5 years, right? But we have a flatter, maybe 6 to 7 every
We
year.
could leave the 895 every year from here on in.
No, I'd like it flattered down. I'm not responsible for that.
And
Thank you.
Actually,
I
good.
understand, but sometimes it's hard to keep it on an even keel
I understand.
because the costs of different items are.
Sure, no, I appreciate that. I'm just asking as a general statement.
Take those bucket trucks, for instance, and when we purchased them, they were $150,000. Now we're up to $200,000 a truck.
Hope they're better trucks.
Yes, they are. Caterpillar no longer designs that or sells that motor anymore.
My quick comment, and then we'll go to Bob, and then back to Pat. And this is for Jim, probably for later, since you have that little arrow that says, remember this number. And it's pertaining to Ben's comments of leveling things off. Yes, we want to build up that reserve for substation, but do we want to start with 300,000 in year one when we're going from 0 to 300? What would be the impact if we gradually come up there so we don't have 895 in year one and 475 in year two? So we reserve the same amount over the 5 years, but back-ended a little bit because we're playing some catch-up. So just a thought for when we get you're rolling these numbers and we have that. Remember this 895. Okay, Bob?
I could look closer at this, Ben, and see if I can push something off into 2017. Something I don't feel is critical.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, and the only suggestion I have or comment, and it kind of follows along what Ben was saying, is, you got the $400,000 for the bucket trucks, which I fully understand you need. Maybe starting in 2018, you start putting money aside for the next 10 years is the life cycle, so $40,000 a year for the next 10 years.
Right.
So when they come up, you have that bucket of money ready.
Sure.
Just a thought.
And just hit me as I look at it again. Question is to whether 2017 is realistic because you have 400 and then the two ongoing projects and nothing else. So are we missing something there?
Can I just make a comment?
Yeah, that's it. I'm gonna. You got to raise your hand because I'm gonna miss you right here.
Oh, you
Yes.
miss
I know.
that. You know that. That's very hard to do, you know that.
I know.
I just want to make a comment about the $300,000. This came directly through strategic planning to the Utility Advisory Committee, who was, when we started the committee really in earnest last year, they were told that you have to come up with a consistent number. And before I left utilities as liaison, I spent a lot of time with Mike and on this particular budget. And I got very comfortable because, based in some of these figures that are coming out of capital, he's also utilizing some money from his operating to kind of compensate for that. So I think we have to kind of be careful. We talked a lot about the $20,000 for the video surveillance, which is very important, along with the water utility, and you'll see that later on. The transformers down at CBD have been a real problem, and if I remember correctly, Mike, is this the ones on Central Avenue that flood?
That's one of the transformer vaults at Central Avenue.
Yeah, that floods on a continual basis.
Yeah, we've had one fail in there because of water and
Yeah. So, I understand, where everybody is going, but I wanted to kind of defend that $300,000 because that was something that Utility Advisory Committee was asked to do. And it makes sense when you start thinking about a substation that was out for a little bit. I think the cost was, $1 million per substation? So we've got to have those cushions. Ever. So just want to make that comment, that's all.
Pat, did you still have?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
So, actually, Jim, I think I had sent you a note. Do we have the current amount of how much is in the electrical capital account at the moment as of the end of the year?
Going into that, I want to say that what Ben was saying about wanting to smooth things out, I think what we need to do is find the right dollar amount of capital, the right amount for water, the right amount for electric, and the right amount for the general capital, and stick with funding that, work towards funding that. Maybe there's a year where we're putting a little money away, maybe there's a year where we're spending money. So the general capital, the electric utility is its own separate standalone entity, just like the water utility. Therefore, it has its own capital account. And we put money away in that every year. And when Michael needs it, and when you need it, you appropriate funds out of it. There is a significant amount in there right now, which would allow us to maybe not have to use the $895 or allow us to ramp up, as Mayor Conley was talking about. There's a little over $800,000 in there already. So looking at that, you could say, okay, well, if we look at these numbers and we average them out and it comes out to $700,000, maybe we're only looking at having to appropriate $650,000 or $675,000 in capital. So that $895 number, as Mayor Conley said, maybe that's not the right number. So the water utility has much less. The water utility only has $220,000 in capital. So, everyone should know, and if you don't, it's important to know that the municipal budget and the electric operating budget and the water operating budget, you vote on it, and that's it. You know, if we need to spend more money, we actually have to come back to you and actually have you vote on it. With capital, it comes up as needed. So if you approve this budget, later on in the year, Michael's going to be putting in for ordinances for you to introduce and then have a hearing and adoption on. And so separate voting for every capital budget item that happens throughout the year. So there have been definitely been years where there's been something that's not on this list that ends up having to be voted on because and appropriated out of the capital account. So to answer Pat's question, and it's an important one, there is a significant amount of funds in there right now which will allow for some sort of smoothing.
Yeah, so I think it'd be good as we look forward, because again, Ben's right, we need to smooth this out. I think that account can help us do it. You know, in the years where we don't have bigger numbers, you might want to add some money to it. In the years where we have a big number, draw some of it down. But I think it would be helpful if you guys actually gave us an idea of where you thought that should stay at an average, you know, and a not to go below and a not to exceed type number, you know, what kind of range. I also have asked in the past, and it would be helpful, I think, to identify how much of the capital, what was considered capital spend by the Strategic Planning Committee is actually in the operating budget. So if we could just identify that, you know, as an asterisk on here so we can also see, you know, to Carmela's point, we are spending money in the operating budget on what the Utility Strategic Planning Committee was sort of counting as capital. The third thing is, you know, my personal view is I kind of hate setting aside money for 10 years and have it do nothing, especially in light of the fact that we're still saying that in the next several years we're going to need to ramp up additional capital spending in other places. You know, my personal feeling is 10 years from now we should really look at whether or not we need to borrow the money and then amortize it over the next 10 or 20 years because a substation has a very long life. I'm not a big fan of us saving money for a truck. I think those things we should be able to fit into the budget. I think large capital projects, though, I'm more of the view that if we have needs, we should spend the money now, not, you know, squirrel lots of pockets of money away.
The only problem I heard with what you said was borrowing and bonding, that you wind up paying more for that same item. Dead set against bonding or borrowing whenever possible. And if you can put the money aside now, so you'll be doing the taxpayers a favor by not having to bond for it. That's where I'm coming from on it.
You know, I think we just disagree on that. But
Well, isn't that what the Strategic Planning Committee had recommended?
I understand what they recommend. I'm just saying I don't personally believe that that's what we should do. I'm not disagreeing with their recommendation is. That's their recommendation. That wouldn't be mine.
I just want to answer one question that Pat mentioned about how much is in the operating budget, that's capital. Under tab 9502 in your big black book, don't have to go to it, don't worry about it. if you look, almost all of Michael's field operations budget would really directly be related to capital. There's $380,000 in there. Professional services are towards the maintenance of the equipment and towards making sure we know how to, drawings for the equipment and alike. $44,000 on line 315 is electrical equipment. $72,000 under line 415. So there's a significant amount of money that's built in here out of that $380,000. That is basically what Pat's asking for.
You're saying it's as much as $500,000?
I would no.
Or is it? Or you were giving me sub?
Oh no, I'm sorry.
You started with 380.
His entire operating budget under electric field is $380,000. Probably
Okay.
close to $300,000 of that is we could directly attribute to capital in some way.
300K. Okay. I think, again, we should sort of at the bottom of this make a note of that so that people understand that this is not the only amount of money we're spending on electric capital every year.
Doesn't go directly towards these large capital items.
No, I understand that, but
Day-to-day operations and routine repairs and improvements.
yeah, but one of the
And if you want to address that as capital, I guess you
one of
could
the
call
things
it
that we've kind of struggled with in the last year and a half, 2 years, whatever it is trying to bring the numbers that the strategic planning committees gave us in terms of what they thought we needed to be spending on an annual basis on capital, whether it be roads or waters or sewer or electric, and what we were showing in our budgets every year. And one of the, in some cases, we are truly doing capital to capital. In the case of your department, there was a lot of money that is in the operating budget, and I think it's fair to show it so that people realize that the number Martin's committee came up with, we're actually not that far off from it, or we're closer to it than we think we are if we just looked at this number on this piece of paper. Thanks.
Actually, just to clarify that, the Strategic Planning Committee's estimate for electric utility capital was close to twice the number for 2016.
Right.
Michael's number was significantly lower than the
Yeah.
895. That's why we called in an outside consultant to resolve this, and so the result of it is an increase of 300. But I don't think it was a lot of money that's in the operating budget. But I do want to point out that there was a very wide chasm between the two estimates of what's appropriate, and I think now most of us feel pretty comfortable with this, and I don't know if there's much else in operating. I'm just not sure. I mean, that's what, I guess we'll go through that next week.
I mean, like Pat was saying, I guess you could call improvements that we do to the system as capital improvements. Or what pot it's coming out of is whether it's operating or the capital.
Michael, when I looked at the numbers, and I forget if Kurt did this or whatever, but a lot of it was just in what I would call wire, cable. But I'm assuming a lot of that you buy out of your operating budget, you don't, yeah. So that was the type of thing that was driving up the strategic planning capital number, but wasn't showing up ever as a capital item. So it meant that it was someplace in your budget.
One of the things that I incorrect to assume that the Strategic Planning Committee did was they looked at the entire system and every foot or mile of wire.
Mm-hmm.
If you had to rebuild the entire town, which is sure, you're never going to do that.
Well, they showed it being rebuilt over a period of, I don't know, 20 or 40 years. I'm assuming, what's the useful life on a piece of cable?
50, 60, 75 years.
Okay, so they
wire up in the air from 75, 80 years ago.
But eventually it has to get replaced. And you replace, what, miles or thousands of feet? I mean, typically, yeah, okay. So, I mean, you are replacing wire. It's just not at the rate that they necessarily projected.
Right.
Okay.
And Michael, just one last question, because obviously with capital and overall budget, there's two parts of it. One are the dollars, and the other is the manpower to get the projects done. So do you feel that what you have there for 2016 is a reasonable plan for you and your crew and any contractors coming in?
Yes, and I believe we had discussed previously about adding a ninth man to the department. That's to be discussed here.
Ask for it now, Mike.
Is it in the black book as a recommended item?
It's not in the budget.
Okay.
Human
Mike-
capital.
So why?
Yeah, right.
Got an aging workforce. amount of time it takes to train an individual to become a top first-class lineman is up to about 11 years now. Work.
Have any foreseeable requirements coming your way? That can't be, Mike. You're an institution, sorry.
Well, if you look at the age brackets, two men that are nearing 56 years of age, far behind that. Time it takes to train an individual to become a top first-class lineman is about 11 years, and understand the system.
The last 10 years, how many people have you brought on? The last 10 years, how many new men have you had join your group?
We've had an 8-man workforce.
No, I understand that, but of the last 10
Replacement.
years, how many replacements have you had?
2.
That's okay.
Kevin and Sam.
So 2 people who are kind of in the,
Well, we've had some guys come and go too, so
oh, okay.
probably be more like 4.
Okay. But basically, of the staff you have right now, 2 of them are within the last decade, and the rest of them are more experienced. Okay.
All right, any other questions? Thank you, Mike. Well done. Water utility.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. On the Water Department here, we've had accomplishments for 2015. We have been working on getting the well lead generator being installed. If everything works well, we should have that delivered here by next week, by the end of this week, beginning of next week, and we'll have that hooked up. Tommy's made a list of a lot of accomplishments that him and Jimmy and Joe did accomplish in 2015. Well, the well E redevelopment and preparing for the generator. And then this well is still offline. They've worked with the light department in regards to doing upgrades at North Street Pump Station when we did all the electric there, when we put the new pad transformers down there. They've installed 5 new hydrants and repaired 1 and flushed and maintained hydrants through the whole town. Both water tanks were cleaned and inspected. There was 3 major 6-inch water main breaks in 2015. One was on Dean Street, the other one was on Shady Lawn and Lawrence. Then we just had one during a snowstorm the other day. When we got hit with the snowstorm, they had a 6-inch water main blow on Troy Court. So they were out there in the snow repairing a water main. Then they did 1,138 New Jersey one-call requests through the whole course of the year. They always get 1 calls for everything. They had 127 meters installed, 50 meters repaired in place, 21 new meters installed. They have 15 new taps and services that they did this year for all new developments for people building houses and that, adding on. Or if they want to go to a bigger service, if they want to go from a 3/4 to a 1-inch or a 2-inch, that's what they add them on, that goes in there too. They've done a lot of various curb box repairs all through the town. They do an annual maintenance on all of our drinking fountains. We have 24 drinking fountains in field houses and public bathrooms in the cassette playgrounds.
So David, can I ask you one quick question on the last slide? Where you said 127 meters were installed, you mean 127 meters were replaced, I believe, because you say 21 new meters at the end? Okay. Is that a typical year for you guys? Okay, thank you.
David, I may be embarrassed asking this question once you give me the answer, but what is a 1-call request?
That's for whenever you dig the state regulations, if you dig 2 inches below grade, you have to do a 1-call to the PSE&G. They call every utility around. You got the gas company, light company, water company, sewer department, fiber optic comes out.
Nice.
What is it? That big gas line with Texas Transit.
Yeah.
They come in and they have to check it before you dig. If you dig and you hit anything, you're liable.
Yep.
They'll fine you like no tomorrow.
Well,
So you
before
have
you
to
do-
wait.
So 1,138 is a comment on how much activity is going on in town?
Yep.
That is,
The gas company likes calling all hours of the night.
Yep.
That's what they do.
and
Okay,
and
thank you.
part, you can end up with multiple calls, one location, but it's only good for 2 weeks, is that, or something like, there's a,
14, yes, 2 weeks is 14 days. Even if we plant, going offline, even if we plant a tree, we have to do a one call for 105 trees. My secretaries have to send out one to everybody, to one call, and that's what they do for that too. Anything below 2 inches.
What's the response time? I mean, when they give you a
They
call, how many
give you
hours do you
their
have to respond?
Response time is 3 days, but if it's an emergency, it's like 2 hours.
Okay.
What it is. Okay, under daily operations, monitoring system operations. They check the water pumps every day, chlorine used, pump run times, air filter and treatment plants. There's strategic water levels at each well. Water sampling is done monthly, quarterly, and yearly. And sometimes they like to throw other stuff in for sampling too, the state. Whenever Tommy goes there, they'll tell him what he has to test for. And you can't get no bottles until the day of or before you go. You have to go get them and then come back and sample. And then daily monitoring of pH and chlorine levels are done on a daily basis. Monthly maintenance and emergency generators wherever you have an emergency generator, you have to run it. And you have to, before you do that, you have to check your air quality for OSHA, for all the regulations in that there. So you have to go online and make sure that the air quality is good to test that generator. That's what goes on there. All right, and now the goals for 2016. Tommy would like to try and repair air handler at the treatment facilities at well A and B. Repair strategic water level chart recorders at well D and E. Well A, roof repairs and replace air release valve. And repair roof at well C. These couple of things here, Tommy didn't know it, but I already have price quotes there. The purchase orders are already being taken care of for maintenance stuff. That's under the operating budget. I take all that money there in the maintenance, in the operating budget to maintain of all the wells. And then repairing a drain at well E. Then various repairs to both water tanks, sample point, manway, tripod, and bolts. Because a lot of the bolts they want to take the cast iron out and put all stainless steel in because they're getting so rusted you can't get them out. So you have to replace all them so you can get in and out. Then make improvements to Rosedale skating rink for easier flooding. Because for when we go over there and we flood the pond, instead of taking maybe, say, a day and a half, we're going to try to do it a lot sooner. Do it in less than a half a day, or a day.
What's it going to take to do that, David?
To do that there, Tommy?
Tommy, you need to step up to the microphone, sorry.
We had a small 1.5-inch fire hydrant, which would normally have maybe 50 feet of hose, and have to tie it down, turn the hydrant on, and let it flood overnight. So what we're going to do with that, because it freezes in the colder weathers, we're going to take that, instead of using that hydrant, we're going to put a curb box underground like most houses have, and then because of the topographical design of the skating rink, that water line will come straight out to the bottom of the level of the field. So all we have to do is turn the water on, turn the water off, and
Perfect, thank you.
And also too, Tommy and Jimmy have been doing a lot of hydrant replacements. We got quite a few hydrants out. When they're out there flushing in them, they're finding they're either too old or they can't repair it, and we're replacing at least 10 of them a year. That's what we've been doing in-house with the 3 men. Right now, we're in the midst of interviewing. We're going to be interviewing for a new laborer because our laborer did resign.
How many people are in the water utility department?
Three.
Three.
Well, two right
Yeah,
now.
but you've got to hire a third.
Yes, we'll be hiring a third.
And Carmela's got a question.
This might be for Tommy. Where is he? He's hiding behind there.
This is a joint thing.
All right. You have your goals for 2016, and we just received that big, huge water report from the consultant. I know it's a lot to go through. Do you think that your goals are going to have to change when you get through that?
That report?
Yeah.
Well, because some of these are those goals. Those goals are some of the
Okay.
repairs that need to be done from the report.
Okay.
And what we can do is, me and Bob can go through it later, and we can prioritize.
Yeah, because that's kind of important. You know, I mean, if you need to repair your roof or whatever, you know, David could step in with something like that. If there's something a lot more important in that report. So.
That is true, but the one leak that's at D-Well is causing a problem because it's raining down inside the air handler room,
Right.
which we cannot have. That roof to be fixed, you know, fairly quickly, and the room repainted would be a more important item to take care of.
Bob?
Yeah. You raised a red flag in my mind when you noted that there were 3 major 6-inch water main breaks in 2015. And I do note that on your list of work to do, let's say capital improvements or water utility capital, you do note some mains that I guess you're going to work on. I mean, I don't know how many water mains there are in town, and I'm thinking of not only the water coming into the house, but water going out, let's say, to the joint meeting. Is there any work or any projects in mind to really look at all the mains and do a complete inventory of what needs to be done on all the mains?
Well, Bob has that under our water capital for upcoming year. He has a few streets. Bob will be talking about that in a little bit, streets where we're going to be doing, because I think we got Cross Street on there for doing water work there, Kenny Street, West Street, Cottage Place, Central Avenue. So they're all part of the water capital projects that Bob has been working closely with Tommy and on this thing, because whenever Bob wants to know about the water mains and that, talk to Tommy and Jimmy, and that's how we come to this and how old they are and how many problems we've been having.
So
Even though we had a few 6-inch main breaks, that's not too bad for the year, for a whole year's time.
Right.
And those mains are not to say that they're in bad repair or old, but we do have older ones in mind of replacing. And what we do is we start with the smaller mains and work our way up to the bigger ones. So we still have some 4-inch in town that we're trying to do away with and bump that up to 8-inch. And when all that happens, then we'll start on the 6-inch mains and work.
you just answered my question. So you kind of gauge it by age and size, and that's how you prioritize them.
Size is actually more definite.
Age. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Ben and then Pat?
Yeah, I was just, the same comment I made before about trying to flatten this out, and i.e. the capital spend over the years. You know, what happens is clear in both of these, which is if I were doing it, and as you do it, you have a very good idea of what you need this year. If you ask me, what do I need in 2020, it's, you know, it's a little bit of a placeholder number. But to the extent you can do that and think carefully about it and get this a little flatter, so much the better. I have one other question. It's really not pertinent to this budget, but it's been on my mind. If you have a well, you know how you're doing water-wise by how much you pump every minute. Is there anything like that with an aquifer? In other words, can you tell how healthy an aquifer is?
Can't per se, but we do have with the static level indicators that we have, and what we do is we monitor the static when the well's not pumping, or where the water level is in the aquifer or in that well.
Oh, you can.
So we only have the 5 points that we can reference. So by those references, the state and we keep an eye on where the water levels are.
I see. Okay. How are we doing?
Good. You know, department started have free-flowing wells where the water would come above ground by itself. And now we're at about 20, some are 28 feet below ground, some are 22, some are 45, depending on which well and what area you're in. has
Thank you.
gone down over.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Pat?
When it comes to the sewer system, we're able to, videotape what the inside looks like so we get a better sense of which ones need to be worked on. Is there any similar technology for the water pipes, or how do you?
That can be done, but you have to be able to shut down. That can be done, but you have to be able to shut down to get the camera inside. What we do is any type of work that's been done, we'll take a look at the inside of the pipe if somebody makes what they call a wet cut, what it does is it takes a round circle out of the side of the main, and we can tell by the thickness of the pipe and the interior what it looks like and how bad it is, or if we have a main break and we have to cut a piece out, we take a look at what's going on the inside. Any chance we get, we can take a look inside the pipe.
Right now, do you feel comfortable that we're replacing our mains at a reasonable rate, that we're keeping up with, or we're staying ahead of, I guess, of really big disasters? Okay.
Pretty tight. We've come a long way since I started here.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Then we'll do the water capital.
Capital here, and then we'll be right here in case there's any questions.
And Bob, as you're covering that, to address the questions related to conditions of other mains and so on, that this...
Absolutely.
All right.
So we'll start with that one. So as far as water main replacement program is concerned, probably when I first got here, the first thing we did was submit a master permit application to NJDEP, which listed what our main replacement schedule is going to be for the next 5 years. Now that has since lapsed, and we need to resubmit that again this year to continue the program. However, I would say that we've probably gone beyond. We've probably done everything that the NJDEP was aware of in terms of our original master permit application, and then some. So we've continued to replace mains, and I think it's time for us to really renew. However, I will say with regards to the 4-inch leaded joint aged mains that remain within the town, that list has gotten much, much shorter than when it was 15, 20 years ago. And we did start the program approximately 20 years ago. So we're in excellent shape as far as water main, 4-inch diameter water main replacement program is concerned. That said, we still have $1 million of work left to do. And presumably when we spread that out, as Ben recommends, over a 5-year or perhaps even 10-year period, you're going to be, obligated to $100,000 to $200,000 a year in main replacement, according to a prescribed schedule. And I see no complication whatsoever in terms of completing that task. And I think, in terms of prioritizing what remains, it should be fairly simple because not that much remains. So that's all good. As far as the Hatchmark report was concerned and the strategic planning guides and the condition assessments for the water system, very good news for the most part is that our system is reasonably well maintained. What's above ground seems to be operating very well, and our programs for replacing what's below ground are in place. So they looked at our operations and they looked at the condition of our facilities and overall felt that we were in very good shape. That being said, they did come up with a very long laundry list of things that we could be doing and prioritize that in terms of criticality. So as far as our current 5-year capital program is concerned, Jim and I spoke about the Hatchmark-McDonald report, and you can see at the last entry here, there's a number of dollars allocated towards projects that are in this Hatchmark-McDonald report. And if you look at the Hatchmark-McDonald report in terms of its bottom line, what we should be spending every year, it was up around $400,000. And that was without the AMR, which we know we're putting money aside for and will happen after the pilot program is done. As far as filling out details of suggested upgrades in the report, we can certainly, moving forward, particularly in 2018 and 2020, where you have a lower total, those can be easily filled in with the projects that remain in the Hatchmark report. And so some of those require design assistance from an outside hired service, and particularly with regards to the well upgrades and facility upgrades that were identified in the report. Some of those require a year's worth of design work to get the bid documents pulled together up to specification and in biddable form, and then in 2017, 2018, we could actually bid and award those contracts and construct them. So there's a little bit of preparation that's needed to catch up with what Hatchmont says in January that we need to be doing, but I think we can do that catch up in the next year or so, and certainly populate the list moving out in a way that not only keeps our financial obligations smooth, because there aren't any real emergencies that they've identified, and also keep our systems well maintained in the process. So, I mean, overall, it was, to me, a thorough and encouraging report as far as the water system was concerned. Any other questions about capital?
Ostry?
So the $100,000 in 2016 is going to be used like for preparatory work for projects that they've identified that you will do in 17, 18, 19, and 20? Is that how?
There's a number of things on the original Hatchmont report which do jive.
Okay.
So one of those is main replacement. You can see the main replacements here, Ostry. Also, a redevelopment project was in the Hatchmont report, and we feel that's a priority and did put that on the list. Well D redevelopment is also on the Hatchmont list. And then there are other things in the Hatchmont list. Some of them are...
So Well D, you have it in 2017.
Once again?
Well D is 2017.
Right, 2017, 2018. But they were identified by Hatchmont as part of our obligation. Okay. Hatchmont didn't concentrate just on 2016. They also spread it out over time.
Right.
Okay. So overall, we have 2 or 3 items that they identified which was already on our capital program, and maybe a dozen other ideas which again are going to require some preparatory work, and then some capital obligations most likely in 2017, which is already low, as you can see in our projection, and 2020.
2018 is low.
2018 is low. Yes, 2020. I'm sorry.
Hatchmont has recommended some of the ones on the top, and then the other $100,000 on the bottom is...
More preparation work for design services.
Carmela and then Pat.
Bob, this preparation from Hatchmont, do you think that some of these projects are going to be ready in 2018?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. What are you going to need personally to make sure that, we start talking about capital the way that Ben has suggested earlier? If some of those projects, we could have a longer list in 2018, 19, and 20, is what you're saying, right? But what would be your needs to make sure that we could start these projects in 2018? And then we have another problem, is if Tom's people are going to be able to do that with 3 people at that point. He's shaking his head no already.
Well,
yeah.
A lot of these projects
do you know what
are,
you know where I'm going? Do you know where I'm going with this?
In a sense, I do, yeah.
Yeah. I know preparation for a lot of this is very detailed.
Correct.
And it creates a lot of work. So if we're thinking that we want to start some of these projects in 2018 that are going to be absolutely necessary, I want to just make sure that you have the capabilities of doing it, and Tom does too at the same time.
That's helpful. It will absolutely require not only capital but outside hired services. And again, if juggling too many individual projects becomes an issue for us internally, then obviously a staffing issue is out there. It couldn't hurt. But I understand the constraints that we operate under. So, from my perspective, if we find the design services able to be completed entirely on the outside hired services, that takes things off my plate as far as having to spend a lot of detail time. Obviously, I'm going to manage the contracts for you, but that can be done.
Pat?
So Bob, for 2016 and 17, we've identified water main projects, and they're going to be running coincidental with the road work as well. Do we not have anything for 18, 19, or 20? We just haven't looked at the list yet to see what's going to happen there, and are we expecting that you're going to be filling that in at some later point?
Good question, Pat. And I think this year I was caught a little bit off guard by the Kinney and West because it wasn't on any prior program that we had actually put together.
Okay.
When Tom came in and said, well, we got to do this, I said, well, then we need to, we have to start programming this moving forward. Otherwise, we're going to get surprised. And I don't like surprises when we're doing design work, obviously.
Yeah.
So I would say by midsummer, we will have a clear 5-year program for water main replacement, and that won't conflict with the road replacement program.
The other thing I was going to say is, I mean, right now, we're looking at the road list and deciding if there's water projects that go with it. But I think
Right.
in some respects, we should flip it and have Tommy really give us his priorities and then see if we can move the road list around, because to me, the water system is a higher priority than the roads. Yes, we drive on them and people see them, but, I think we should really put the higher priority infrastructure items ahead, even though people don't necessarily see them until there's a big hole in the ground and water gushing everywhere.
I'm 100% in agreement.
Okay.
Just to Pat's point, for 2018 and out, should there really just be a holder at this point for water main? Because I don't hear that there's any point in the near future we're caught up and we can take a year off. Is that a fair?
After 2020, I think we
No,
can...
well, right now, the budget says after 2017, we have no water mains. Even though there's no streets, we should for 2017, 18, and or 2018 on out, rather, not 27. We should have a reserve.
To completely populate the 5-year capital.
Okay, yep. Okay.
Right.
Ben?
Yes, I just want to understand this a little better. So summer of this year, you expect to work on a 5-year plan, or you'll have a 5-year plan. But as far as this year is concerned, you already have that plan. I mean, it's those water main replacements you have on the budget. So that's not going to change.
Not going to change.
Okay, so we're talking about 2017 on out.
Correct.
Thank you.
But Ben, those water projects are primarily being driven by road work, right? We're working
Yes.
on all those roads this year and next year, Bob?
We're
Or expect the
going
county
to
to?
complete the road and water at the same time.
Yeah, so that's why they're there, and that's what I'm saying right now.
No, I
That's how we
understand.
tend to do them.
We've always sought to avoid that. So
No, I understand that we want to do them so that we don't have to rip a road up, but.
Yep. And normally it's, as Pat's saying, it's a condition of the road dictates when we do the water main, but there may be some times when it gets flipped that a water main is so bad that we have to
Last time we-
prioritize the road because of the water main underneath.
last time we did them both at the same time, I believe, was Chapel Street, which was 5 years, maybe 6 years ago.
Okay, any other questions on the water capital? At this point, I'll open this up to the public for anyone in our audience that has questions or comments on the utility presentations we just had. So it's just limited to those things. Seeing none? Oh, yes, Tom, come on up. Sorry, I was going too fast.
Tom Benzinger, Rolling Hill Court. I just want to congratulate, I think, the content of the presentation. I think it's becoming a much more understandable, material that somebody can read and understand. A couple of comments, or just a question. Looking at the electric utility, are any of the current, what I'm listing as potential expenditures being driven by the Green Village development?
No.
I look at 210,000 fixtures on King Road from Prospect to Madison Avenue, 210. Is any of that being driven by Green Village? Same thing for water.
I had the same thought when I was looking at it.
Nothing is.
No, they're paying for it.
So,
The only portion of that under new lighting along here, there'll be 3 or 4 lampposts at the Kings Road end of the KRE project. But no, it's not being driven by that. It's driven by these horrendous-looking green poles that are still here.
Hey, Mike. The reason why I raised the observation is because we're having enormous fee permits that are driving up the revenues in the operating budget. But if the expenditures are being incurred down in the utilities, they're not being properly offset.
And maybe, Tom, under our ordinance, all of the infrastructure on site is paid for by the developer. So all the transformers, all the connections, all the electrical work, we just bring power to the curb. They're responsible from there on in. So the only obligation we have right now for KRE project are basically 3 light poles that we're going to split the cost so that we have a uniform appearance across the entire length of Kings Road.
And plus
the sewer that we're obligated to up to a cost of $120,000 to improve the sewer capacity in the road. Anything beyond that, which will inure to the benefit of all the users, including Geralda and Drew, which is sending down there, will be on the developer's dime.
Well, that clarifies that, because it just looked like just an odd number. Observation in terms of material, we were talking about most of these are what I call the expenditure side of the budget. What I think you're going to need to do and present is the revenue side and keep track of the fund. Because basically I think what we're suggesting is that there should be a sinking fund approach for major capital expenditures. And if I were going to just make an observation, there are going to be recurring things, surprises that happen all the time. You're just going to have those plugged in. But the major, when you're talking about, the substations, you're talking about transformers. I'm not smart enough to know what major are. But when I see $400,000 for a truck or 2, that's major to me in terms of what we're thinking about. That expenditure should be distinguished so that you keep track. There is a schedule in here, someplace down the way that Jim has, which basically presents the years from 2008 to 2015, beginning balance of the fund, appropriations, expenditures. I think you need the 2 things together, because you're confusing yourself when you have huge sinking fund being created for major expenditures. You don't know what is really going to be needed somewhere in 2025, 2035. So you have to distinguish between the 2. That's just a brief observation that I think, Jim, we could probably, help, because trying to keep track, the ordinances are different than the appropriation. And the question about, I heard Mr. Rowe talk about building major funds up, in the capital improvement when you could need them elsewhere, you could bond them. That way it would help you keep track of what are being sinking funded versus what are what I call normal capital expenditures. Only 2 observations.
Thank you very much, Tom. And Rob, welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sorry for being late, of course. But, when the regulators want to talk, you talk.
Yep.
The only question I have is, so this sinking fund, and I see there's $1.5 million just on that last electric utility put away. So is that money going to be encumbered, or is it's just going to sit there? Will we encumber the money?
But I was wondering that too, whether it's, sits on the balance sheet as reserve money, and then in future years you see a transfer from that account into the capital in the year it's spent.
It also can't be appropriate. Unless you authorize it by an appropriation ordinance, it cannot come out of the pot and be spent for a purpose other than it was dedicated for. So you, the governing body, would control the release of any money out of any of the 3 capital pots. You have to approve an individual appropriation ordinance. So you control it.
Well, so we can put the money there.
We can put the money there, and it doesn't come out unless you say
all of us are dead and gone.
They could be spent for other reasons.
Spent on something else.
Correct.
If the governing body chooses at that time.
Thank you.
And just before we go to...
There's no way to encumber it so that it has to be spent on on the substations?
Well, because an ordinance can be removed.
It could be a double-edged sword, though.
Yeah, a couple of options. You can actually encumber it. If you wanted to reserve and put money away immediately for a specific project, It can be reserved and put away for a specific. So there's, by putting it in the capital improvement fund, that gives you flexibility to a certain extent, but it can only be on capital. You can't turn around and take that money and spend it to hire another man or any sort of operating expenses. So you restrict it already by putting it in the capital. Then you can further restrict it if you want to by either encumbering it, as you talked about, and say, hey, we're going to encumber $100,000 towards the substation, or you can reserve it. Either of those would actually then say, well, that money's really just there for that.
So once it goes in the capital, it can never be taken out of capital.
Correct.
So then there's no need to encumber it. We know it'll be spent on capital.
Right.
Yeah, but money's fungible, and so you could just underfund capital in a year and move with the money you normally would have put in capital somewhere else and spend that money. It's
Well, what if you did it by ordinance, though?
you can undo it by ordinance.
Yep.
Unless we encumber.
So if it was encumbered for substation, and all of a sudden, every utility pole in the town came down and they had to shift the money, I would assume, or they would introduce the ordinance, unencumber, and then re-encumber the money for the new project. But it would be a multiple step thing, as opposed to if it was put in the capital, they would have the flexibility as the day it was needed.
No lock boxes.
And before you get started, Jim, I just want to emphasize a comment that Tom made, and on the presentations we've seen so far. The last couple of years, we've seen your work as assistant administrator, but now as our CFO, you have taken it to yet another level. So we appreciate all this, and as the residents get to see it, they will truly appreciate it also. Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Well, we can head right over away from the utilities and into the what we'll call current fund and general capital. And bear with me, not caught up yet. So with general capital, it's important to take a look at the actual operations of the general capital improvement fund. Funds go in and funds go out. There's a great, even more detailed explanation of this on RoseNet. If you go under the annual financial process, it was the report that was given to you guys back in December that explains all the funds that are coming and going. But this schedule just shows the activity of the general capital improvement fund, and that is the pot of money that we were just talking about that's reserved for capital items for municipal purposes. There is, as I said before, a capital improvement fund for the electric utility, a capital improvement fund for the water utility. This is general capital, so this would be sewers, fire, police, roads, and alike, library, building improvements, stormwater system, and things like that. So this particular sheet just shows how the funds flow back and forth. And you can see we're in excellent shape. We did not spend or encumber as much as I think we had originally thought. That's this $2.7 million number. I think we're probably thinking it's more into $3 to $3.5 million. But this year, the department heads only brought $2.7 million, and so we're starting this year at the beginning of the year with $1.6 million in the pot. And that's similar to the conversation we're having before about the electric utility having a certain amount of funds. Rob, you missed it. There's $800,000 in the electric utility capital improvement fund, a little over $200,000 in the water utility. So we have these capital funds that are there in that pot, and then every year you add to it through the municipal budget. The line in the municipal budget called Capital Improvement Fund is money that's taken out of the municipal operating and put in and reserved for capital. So the next slide shows.
Could we just a quick question?
Yep.
Is it now?
If
you you and I have discussed this. I found this more concerning because of the trend. If you look back to 2008, 9, 10, we were eating down the improvement fund. We were not putting any additional money into it. We turned the corner, and now it continues to build. So there's a message in there, it seems, that says that you're appropriating more money than you're able to spend. And at some point, you have to ask yourself either how do you spend it more efficiently so that what's appropriated actually goes through the system, Or alternatively, which I don't really like, is how do you appropriate less and get closer to exactly what you need? I mean, I'm not suggesting that needs to be zero. I don't think that would be prudent. But I'm not sure it needs to be 1.6 million either.
I think we talked about this earlier today. I think that ultimately the question is, what's the right number of capital that we need to spend every year? And then do we have the capacity or ability to do that? Certainly we can easily go out and buy trucks, go out and buy pieces of equipment, but how much engineering bandwidth do we have to get the roads done? There have been some very difficult projects that Bob's worked on over the last 6 years. The MRC was a very complicated project. Ridgedale Avenue, just this past year, was a very complicated project. Other roads are much easier. When you're doing milling and overlay, we have a significant amount of milling and overlay, over $800,000 in the budget this year in milling and overlay. That's a real easy, you can easily do a lot of milling and overlay. That's done typically by a company that comes in. It's measured by the square foot. There's very little engineering that has to happen with that. But when you're doing an entire road reconstruction and you're having to replace curbing, improve storm water drainage and stuff, there's a lot more to that. So we really need to focus on our bandwidth and our ability to actually execute.
And one thing, in the past we've had I'm sorry.
Go ahead and then Carmela.
We've had a slide that showed all the capital budget accounts in one place. I think that's always helpful because I think it is good to look at all the money we've got reserved in different places and see how it's growing and shrinking.
You're talking about the three
water, electric,
capital,
and general.
Yep. And also, Pat, I know you've asked about this, and we will get it. I've been working on it. Is what current ordinances are open? And what's the status of? So Bob and I have worked on that. There's money that's been encumbered for various projects. Is the 70% completed? Is it 90% completed? How much money was originally appropriated? How much money is left in that ordinance? So we'll be getting that to you as well.
Okay, I have a question for you. Because I don't know if I get all of this, but anyway. It's more or less used as a contingency fund. Am I correct?
Capital Improvement Fund?
The General Capital Improvement
General Capital Improvement Fund?
In the event that, we reach the end of the year and there's a water main break and whatever, I mean, that money can be utilized here.
Yes, you
from
need to.
This particular.
You don't want to have a zero balance because anything
Right.
can happen. Tommy had the water main break. There could be any sort of issues. Michael had the issues at the substation. Anything could happen that could require us to have some capital. So there'd be no reason you want that number to be zero. But and Pat asked this earlier, what's the right number to be kind of that balance that we always have in that account?
Well, I guess that would depend on how have we used this fund in the last couple of years then.
Correct.
For, as a contingency, something that comes up or whatever. So,
Well,
that would probably.
it's not just contingency. It's contingency and non-water, non-electric capital. That this is a more flexible one. This could be used to do a water project. A water project can't be used to do a road project.
Right.
Water capital, rather.
But if somebody comes up to us, mid-year and say, why didn't you do my road? And whatever. Is this where we're going?
Exactly.
Okay.
Or something over the winter, we didn't even plan for it, and all of a sudden at the end of the winter, something happens to a road or a piece of equipment that we thought was going to last another 5 years just is done. This is the pot of money where we go to. And the way it works, as you know, is unlike the regular budget, we'd come to you, we'd have an introduction of an ordinance, and you'd say, yes, we're going to spend it, and then there'd be a waiting period, and then there'd be a hearing, and then those two actions by council on introduction and approval of an ordinance would appropriate those funds.
Jim, in regards to, it's a follow-up to Ben, and it was a very good concern. Would it be safe to say that now that we're really starting to plan out these projects over 5 years, as recommended by the strategic planning committees, that we'll get a better feel for what that number will be? There won't be as many surprises. I mean, there's always going to be some surprises, but as projects get planned out a little better, like Carmelo said, this is kind of like the contingency fund, we'll come to get a better feel for what that number should be.
Absolutely. I mean, having the Kurt Wilson, the consultant, come in and talk to us about the condition of the substations and realizing we need to start putting money away now for that substation. If we didn't do that, and we're 7 years down the road, and we came to you and said, hey, we have $1 million project we need to fund,
Right.
or a $3 million project we need to fund next year, that would not be good. So the more planning we can do, clearly the better. Also, this $1.6 million in the budget that I know you all have seen, that'll be presented in a little bit, there is a $3.5 million that we're talking about setting aside to add to this pot. But the average ask over 5 years is $4.2 million. So if we spent the $4.1 million that we're expected to on next year's budget, we're only putting in 3.5, that number of 1.6 is going to decrease. Drawing that down. Does that make sense?
Yep. Pat?
No,
You're good.
yeah.
I guess just one other quick comment, and we would see this more in electric and water capital. Eventually, two new lines could appear. One is transfer from reserves for the big project. You'd see in the 1 year $1 million transfer in, but in the years leading up to that, decreased by $300,000 or whatever it is. So you don't have that bottom number building up without remembering part of that is being earmarked. So you would draw that down.
And it typically determines where those reserves come from. So in the water situation, it's just a separate line item. It's coming from operating, goes straight into that reserve. You wouldn't see it here at all. It's just a separate line in the audit that says we have X amount reserved for the metering project. So other times you can say, I want to take money from the capital improvement fund and reserve it for this particular item. Correct. Okay.
All right.
We'll jump to the 5-year capital plan. We've seen this slide a number of times. I put it in here real quick just because I wanted to show these 5 numbers here for 5 years of what the expected general capital is. I'm going to not look at the water and electric utility capital. I'm only going to focus on the general capital, what we need to fund from our municipal budget. And adding those numbers up comes to $21.3 million. Divide that over 5 years, that's $4.2 million. And as we talked about before, is that the right number? Is it $3.5 million? Is it $4.2 million? Right now, it's $4.2 million, and I think, and I would encourage you at next meeting in February 8th to really work with the department heads and everyone that's going to be coming in to determine whether any of these numbers can be shifted. There's some significant fire department apparatus in there. There's a very significant police department upgrade to their 911 system in there. And there's just a lot of big projects that are in there. And the point of us doing this 5-year plan is so we don't get surprised, and so we can work through and come up with the right number. 4.2 million may be a little too much. If we can work with the department heads and spread that out a little bit, I think we can get to a number that's a little more manageable from a budgetary standpoint.
Hey, Jim, realistically, next year, what do you think you're going to be able to fund in terms of capital?
The budget that I have has $3.5 million based on using a lot of electric utility surplus and based on a 1.5% tax.
No, I'm talking about 2017.
Oh, I'm sorry, 2017?
Yeah, next year. We're in this year already.
2017, I think 3.5 million is another legitimate number. I'm interested to see what happens with municipal surplus. There was a certain amount of tax collection that didn't happen this year that is falls to delinquent tax line.
Mm-hmm.
The delinquent tax line is also another driver to municipal surplus. Robert and I thought we were going to generate $4 million in municipal surplus this year. We only generated 3.8. So I think next year it's going to kind of bump the other way. So it could be 4.2 next year. So it'll average to $4 million over the 2 years. But that will give you a little more flexibility to say, okay, let's use $4 million of municipal surplus. That gives you another $200,000 there. So I think $3.5 million is very reasonably funded next year, depending on what you all do with property taxes, electric rates, and the like.
But you're not coming up with 5.1 million. Okay, so the council really needs to start to look at this and manage to a number. And this is also where I go back to, again, we're setting a chunk of money aside in the electric utility for something that may happen 10 years down the road. If we can't close the gap between $3.5 million and 5.1, that money could be used to help take care of some of that.
Correct.
Okay.
and that's important. I don't want to gloss over that. That $5 million number is a big number. And we
It's a
can be
huge
sitting here
number.
saying, if it's really $5 million, if I'm here a year from now and saying it's really $5 million, we're going to have a hard time funding that in our budget, even with a large amount of money in the pot. We'll see. I'd like you all to really, at next meeting with the department heads, jump in, and maybe you can't get out to the 4th and 5th year with any firmness, but you can at least get in the next 3 years. Okay?
Rob?
No, it's okay. Never mind.
Okay. So I'm going to jump to the municipal budget. And sorry for the small numbers. There's a copy online on Rosenet. There's a copy on the counter there. And this is our municipal budget, our summary of revenue and appropriations. It should look familiar. We've been doing this since the early 90s. I know we do have an alternate budget format that I promise we will have we'll have it the next February 22nd, I promise. So, but in any event, this is a familiar document and one that I'd like to go through and talk about some of the line items on. I highlighted them here in yellow, and then we'll just kind of flip through some of them real quickly here. We'll talk about cost drivers. What I did here, it's not an optical illusion. I just kind of wanted to gray out a bunch of the numbers so your eyes don't go crazy and you just focus on the numbers that are highlighted here. So the capital improvement fund is increasing a significant amount, $447,000 under this proposed budget. And we talked about that, the need to get that up to at least $3.5 million. The second large increase is the Madison-Chatham joint meeting. Ray may be able to talk more in depth about that, but clearly I know you all are aware of the discussions that are happening and the flow monitoring that's going on there and the budget and how much do we really need to reserve. There's actually also a true-up function that's involved as well. So if it turns out that the flow this year is measured and the two governing bodies determine that Madison underpaid for 2015, not only are we going to have to pay for 2016, we're also going to have a dollar amount that we need to pay as a true-up for 2015. That number is very hard to estimate, so I estimated as best I could without going overboard. So there's two numbers right there that are driving the budget up by close to $590,000. Any questions?
Rob?
Two questions. What would if we just did the mill rate for the library, what would that be?
We can get to that, but
okay,
if we just did the mill rate, the number there would be probably about $110,000 less. And the library number, I haven't gotten the municipal information sheet. It's a very boring sounding document, but it's a very important document that actually drives the actual mill rate and how much we pay to the library. But we pay to the library the mill rate plus $110,000, which because we used to pay for their electric bill, then we said, no, we're going to start charging you for your electric bill. And so we gave them a budget.
So that 3.68% increase is because of electric?
That 3.68% increase is due to the increase in assessed rateables, because it's assessed rateables times the mill rate that drives that number.
Yeah, the 110 has not changed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the mill rate plus the 110, okay.
Right.
Yep.
What percentage of the budget is being paid for by property taxes? So it's 14,049 divided by 30.3. I don't have a calculator
Yes.
handy.
Oh, you know what, Rob? There's a slide coming up on that.
46.4.
You want to hold off? There's a slide coming up on that.
Okay, so, okay. It compares to the previous years?
Yes, yep.
Thank you. Okay, wonderful.
We'll get
Great question.
Hey, Jim,
Great question. He's got the answer.
have we actually calculated how the amount we're charging for the tax levy is going to impact the rate?
charging. What do you mean?
What's the increase in the actual in the rate going to be? Have we started to look at that yet?
What's the increase in the assessed rateable value and how that's going to increase the property taxes?
I mean, right now we're saying
we're 2%. We could have a 2% increase here, but it blends into 1.5% on that. Haven't looked at it yet. Not as big as last year. Last year we had quite a big bump in assessed rateables. This year we had a bump in assessed rateables and in the added and omitted. That's when someone does construction, like the old Maersk, now Merck building did a significant amount of construction. The value of that property was increased by that. But there were some offsets due to tax appeals and some people successfully appealing their taxes, and so that offset reduced the assessed rateables.
It's fair, man.
So- But in what period of time do you think you'll get us a number in terms of how this is actually going to impact the rate?
I'll get it to you soon because it was on the annual debt statement. It's a small amount. I'm
Okay.
going to say it's probably 0.2%.
Okay.
Jim, can I just ask you, going back to Madison Chatham Joint, did you base that 2016 figure on the true-up, those figures that we've been getting
I think
at this
it's
point, or are you
something in
sticking to
between.
the
Something in
regular-
between.
It's somewhere in between. I actually have. So the Madison Chatham Joint Meeting is expecting a budget of about $1.6 million. If you assume 70% for Madison, which is a large allocation, larger than we've had typically in the past allocation, that would calculate out to be 1.123. You can see I have 1.175 there, and extra amount there for that true up. So if we come in under 70%, if you all are successful in working with our good neighbors to the east, then there'll be some room there. But right now, I have to budget something that I think is conservative but not crazy.
Yep.
Okay, debt service, real quick. I know we had talked about debt service in years past. We had the refunding, but we also did have a new borrowing with the Madison Chatham Joint Meeting of $1.68 million that was done through the Environmental Infrastructure Trust, which gives the Borough of Madison actually money interest-free. So a portion of that, a significant portion of every time we borrow from the Environmental Infrastructure Trust is an interest-free loan, and then the residual is at a very favorable tax rate, or interest rate, I should say. And but there is an increase this year being driven almost completely by that new debt that was incurred at the Madison Chatham Joint Meeting that the borough is responsible for whenever there's a need for capital that is funded through debt with the Madison Chatham Joint Meeting, which is our sewage treatment facility jointly owned with Chatham. That amount is split. Madison borrows the funds, Chatham borrows funds. Together they're sent over to the joint meeting so purchases can be made. So we have an $83,000 increase in our appropriations for that. So that's another significant cost driver to this year's budget.
Jim?
So you use the 70% for that too as well?
No, that was
just purely how much is the
it's
bond,
purely
how
the-
much
the
is the
bottom
interest.
line.
Yeah, we borrowed. The joint meeting can't borrow.
Jim? Based upon conversations we've all had with the joint meeting, there's potential for a lot more borrowing down the road, given a lot of work that needs to be done there. Is there any way to account for that in this budget? Maybe not this year, but in future years? Or is it any one year we could get hit pretty hard?
That's a good question. I think the traditional capital funding for the joint meeting has always been through borrowing.
Yeah.
So the best course of action I can ask you all to take when you're working at the joint meeting is to get a real good capital plan, just like we're talking about here for 5 years, and get an understanding of what those projects are going to cost. Then I can go out and get debt service figures and get an understanding as to how much that debt service number could change. Over time, that debt service number is going to go down because we're going to be paying off more and more of the bonds that are attributed to that. There's the bonds for the repair, the renovation of this building and the renovation of and building of the public safety. That's also in that debt service number. That debt service number is not just Madison Chatham Joint Meeting, it's other debt that the borough has, the refunding bond as well. So, but that's the best thing that we can do is the
Yes.
same type of planning we're doing here, have them do at the joint meeting. Okay. Salaries and benefits. I thought this was really interesting. So in good and bad news, I guess, we'll say, pension costs went up significantly this year. And that is one of those bills that you get that's a one-pager. They do not, the state, does not break it all out. We get a bill for the police and fire, which is completely funded through this municipal budget. And we get a bill for the PERS system, which covers staff in the water utility, so a portion of the water utility operating budget pays for that. Staff in the electric utility, so a portion of the electric utility operating budget pays for that. A portion of what is sent to the library in the mill rate actually pays for their share of pension, and then a portion of the municipal budget. So that's going up by $94,000. That's just a significant driver. But what's interesting is, I don't know what made me think about it, but I just took a look back at salaries and health and pension in 2011 versus today. What's important to know is that the Borough of Madison employees are really paying a significant amount of their health insurance benefits now, and a significant amount additional into their pension. There was $100,000 is that the employees are paying into the pension system, and $600,000 towards the health insurance, where before they didn't pay anything. There's some employees that pay over 30% of their health insurance premium. They cover themselves. So it's a very significant amount. So I took those numbers, and I took the salaries for 2016, which are broken down right here, health and pension, and I put them down here. I subtracted out these adjustments due to the health and the pension, and compared kind of the net, if you will, the net salary, net health, and net pension. And what you see, the salary line item here, I'm just going to point to it there, is $9.5 million. In 2016, this year, that's net of paying those two big amounts that the employees pay that get deducted out of their paycheck. Compared to salaries in 2011 of 9.58, we're actually paying less in salaries now, or our employees in totality are receiving less. There's been a shrinkage in staff.
We're paying more, they're just receiving less.
We're paying more in health insurance.
But
The pension's about the same.
But if we're paying $10.256 million in 2016, and we only paid we paid 9.58 in 2011, we're paying more.
Yes, but of that 10.25,
Yes.
600,000 is, if you want to think of it, kind of coming in from the employees offset.
Wait, I'm confused. You've got 700,000, 600,000, and 100,000. What's the 700,000 adjustment on the salary?
700,000 is the amount that I'm reducing salaries by. What I'm trying to do.
No, stop. How are they paying into their salaries? I can understand if they're paying towards their health care, you do an adjustment there. If they're paying more towards their pension, so it's lowering our obligation, I can show that there. I don't understand how you're making an adjustment to the salary line.
Oh, okay. Let me check and get back on that package. We have this. So, what's that? Oh, okay. Let me check and get back.
No, you wouldn't adjust this up.
I understand
Okay.
what you're saying.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So next is department operating. Under department operating, there's a little less than $100,000 increase. That's this number right here. And that number is almost half of it. It was represented by rock, salt, brine, and snow removal budgets being increased this year. We had a significant amount of dollars that we spent this year already on hiring outside companies to truck. You probably saw pictures or saw actual trucks in town. David had all of his trucks, but then in addition, he had to have outside trucks come in and help to haul all the snow away. So if you take away that $45,000 of increase in rock, salt, brine, and snow removal budget, the rest of the budget only goes up 1.9%, which is within that 2%. So any questions on department operating?
I think it's also worth mentioning it's significantly lower than it's been over the last couple of years.
That's correct.
It's a very good thing.
That's correct.
Something to be commended.
I mean, the increase.
Increase,
Yeah, okay.
substantially smaller.
One other question going back to the healthcare benefits. Have we reached now the end of the line where the employees were picking up over a 4-year period of time? So starting next year, we're going to get hit with the bulk of whatever increase comes through from the state, because we must average between 70 and 75% of the total cost of healthcare benefits. The employees are picking up the rest. So if there's a 6% increase, we're going to own at least 4 to 5% of that.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, if there's a 6% increase, our share is going to go up 6%, and their share would go up 6%, wouldn't it?
Well, but I'm talking about of the total we own.
That
So
line
sure,
item.
ours going up 6%.
Yeah, going to the days of more money coming in from the employees and keeping that line item static. That line, Pat's exactly right. That line item, if that bill goes up by 6%, that line item really needs to go up by 6%.
So that would be a lot.
So I want to shift over to the revenue side. I do want to say that I feel the appropriations that we just talked about are probably the most solid of all the numbers that I'm able to give you. Really went through line by line through the black book. We do that over a 6-month period. Every employee, their salary is literally calculated when they get a step increase, if they get one, across all departments. So I feel as though the most solid numbers are those appropriation numbers, with the exception of the joint meeting. So with that, Mr. Catalano asked about property taxes. So, excuse me, property taxes as a percent of total revenues are actually dropping. Here's the property tax line item. This is the upper section of our municipal budget that has all the revenues. And budget, the 1.5% tax increase can actually go up significantly more if you want to. I'm not advocating for that, but there is a tax levy cap that the state of New Jersey has, and that says that municipalities can't raise property taxes any more than X percent. But it's 2%, but there are exceptions to that cap. I think we saw the school board use those exceptions last year. Exceptions include debt service. We saw that number go up. They include sewage processing. We saw that number go up. And they include capital improvements. So all three of those cost-driving numbers that we're concerned with theoretically could be funded with a greater property tax increase. For this budget, I went with 1.5, figuring, I talked to Bob Landrigan, I talked to Ben, and that's kind of where we thought we'd come in. That's up for council to decide. And as Mr. Cavanello asked, what's the property tax as a percent of total revenues? It actually is dropping a little bit this year. About the total amount of property taxes being raised and dividing it by total revenues.
Ben and then Pat?
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. The Strategic Planning Committee on the budget two observations. One is that the average percentage funded by taxes in Madison over about the last 10, 12 years is approximately where it is right now in this budget, i.e. 46, 47%. We felt that we'd be better off if we could get it 50 plus, a bit over 50. So in this case, the trend is a little upsetting, but I emphasize little. It's a step in the, as I think my colleagues would agree, it's a step in the wrong direction.
Pat?
Yeah, I would say I concur, especially after last year. I thought we were improving a little. And I'm looking this year, we're moving another $530,000 from the electric surplus over to cover operating. We're adding another $70,000 to cover the additional debt service. So we're moving another $600,000, and in comparison, we're raising property taxes $200,000. I know it's kind of heresy, but from a long-term view and looking down the road, I'm just concerned that some year when the electric prices start to reverse, and we're going to be back in the same situation we were when we had fairly significant expenses, and if you go back and look at that capital budget sheet, you could see where we went from almost $5 million down to almost zero in terms of our capital fund, because we didn't have the money to take out of the electric utility, and we didn't have the money in our coming from anywhere else. And I'm not a big fan of the direction this is heading in right now.
The only thing I would add to that is that you'd have to, I can see the argument for saying let's go to the cap at 2. If you'd have to blow through that substantially to make a meaningful difference in what you just said.
Well, if you remember, I've been saying this for 3 years, actually for 4 years, and part of the problem you run into is every year that you don't do it, you keep making the problem bigger.
I know.
And so you just compound it, and that's what we keep doing.
Rob?
Thank you. Maybe it's a step in the wrong direction, but I think it's because we never look at spending. Spending just goes up all the time. And then, in addition to this, at our last meeting, we went through what seemed to be very significant requirements on open space that I don't think can be realistically addressed if in fact that's what we're going to do based at that current tax rate of 1.8 cents. Eventually electricity is going to go up, and it might not be for 15 or 20 years, but it's going to, and it's going to be horrible when it does, especially when you're looking at the potential of buying fire trucks. We're looking at the very negative impact that we're going to have next year as it pertains to health, the health costs associated with our workforce. You just can't keep asking for more money because eventually people don't have it. And I don't ever see anything that's done on spending. So, Ben, if I look at these six, right, if I look at these 6 data points, right, for us to get to the average of 46, how low were we in 8, 9, and 10? 7, 8, 9, and 10? Because you mentioned before that the 10-year average is around 46%. I mean, were we spending? Were we at like 40? Were we down around 40% for those years, funded through?
I'll take a look.
Municipal tax.
I'll take a look and send it to you.
Yeah, I don't have that.
I mean, this just, and maybe I'm mistaken. I probably am, but I thought I recalled in the initial strategic planning committee's budget that they wanted to see this number get above 50.
No, that's right.
That's what Ben was saying.
Sorry.
Yep, that's exactly what Ben was saying.
Yeah.
Right. So, if we just keep spending the way we're doing, I don't see how it's going to happen.
Well, a couple challenges with that too. When you talk about a 1.5% increase in property taxes, you're only talking about on half of the budget. So what's happening to the other half of the budget?
That's Pat's point, right? Yeah, absolutely.
The other half of the budget, like we have right now, is going down with prior year operating surplus, or staying flat like municipal sources. It's very problematic that you're spending the average. Take away those big cost drivers, which you could increase property taxes to cover. The rest of the budget is increasing by 2.6%. Not bad, but if you're only increasing by 1.5% here, and that doesn't cover the entire budget, it only covers half of it. The other half, the surplus, the revenues, municipal revenues and stuff like that, they're going to have to cover somewhere. So I'm sympathetic, and I think without upsetting my father in Florida too much, I think we need to make sure that the property taxes, get closer to the 50% number.
Yeah. Right, but I think that we've cut spending to get it there. I mean, I just don't think you should keep spending like this and then just jack prices. Jack taxes. We really need to discuss. There are several items that we've talked about, quite a bit. And at the end of last year's budget, we said we were going to address them, and I'm not sure if they're being addressed. And I don't know if this is the proper form to bring them up, but we need to do something. We just can't keep the status quo is going to sink us long term.
Just received, just so you know, Mayor, 48.8% is the average of property taxes to the budget. Thank you, Mr. Bintinger, from 2005 to 2014. So it's 48.8.
Right.
So
There are a couple years in 44, and then from there it's a band from 53 to 47. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, just to clarify, I believe when we first did that exercise that came up with the number I mentioned earlier, it was earlier. It was a 10-year slot earlier than that.
So it's a moving. Yep.
Just didn't get it on the record.
We'll come back because I think Bob had.
Yeah. Last year I've always been an advocate for taxing the average taxpayer as little as possible, because that's a number that the average person cannot control. And if you cannot write that off your income tax, what good is it? It's just money out of your pocket. The average resident when you talk to them in the street, says, cut my taxes. You know, New Jersey has a bad rap for being one of the heaviest tax states in the union. So now what we're saying is, and I mean, it's a nice guideline to say, well, you know, 2%, you know, tax at the max, 2%, and that if you even want to go higher, you know, plus of those exceptions you noted. But Madison is in a unique position because we have this thing called the electric surplus, this electric utility, which enables us to play catch-up right now. Because what I've said for the past couple of years is we are in a catch-up mode with our capital spending. For years, it was underfunded. I can remember some years when we put in zero, when we put in $500,000. Now we're spending what needs to be spent. So now how are you going to pay for it? I mean, if we all say we need this, we need X, Y, and Z, how the heck are you going to pay for it? Are you going to tax the hell out of the residents? Or are you going to use this resource that you have, which people can control to some extent, and then once you're over the hump, maybe get to that 50% mark? You can't hammer the residents in both ways. I mean, are you going to go up to a resident and say, that street needed to be done, but your street doesn't need to be done? Well, why? Everybody's entitled to a safe street, proper drainage. You can't take one over the other. Are you going to say that water main should be done, but not that one? Well, you know, we heard a good reason. They seem to have a good plan to do it. Once we're over the hump, yeah, we could start trying to drive more toward that guideline. But right now, it's a very delicate balancing act. And I, for one, don't want to feed that image of Madison being like the rest of the state of New Jersey, taxing its residents to the max.
Pat, and then back over to Rob.
Well, I agree with Bob, but I think, Bob, the problem is that I'm not questioning the $500,000 that we're increasing the capital fund from the electric surplus. I'm questioning the $600,000 we're taking out to fund operating and the debt service, and that's the part I'm really questioning. That's what's really pushing this in the wrong direction. I don't have an issue with where the capital, it's the operating part, and that's the thing that we've been, and one of the things I'm going to go back to when we talked to the committee, you know, and I asked them, I think, 2 years ago about what their recommendation would have been for the tax levy increase. And they said, you know, the tax levy increase should really be a reflection of how much you're increasing the budget, at a minimum, the operating part of the budget. And we haven't been even doing that. And that's the real concern, is that we're taking more money, more out of the electric utility, and that money is still coming from our residents. I mean, we can't kid ourselves. The money, the surpluses are coming from someplace, and it's the same people paying a tax just through a different methodology. So I think, you know, the fact that we're increasing the budget 4.3% this year is actually the bigger issue, and we're trying to cover a lot of that from the electric utility, and that's what's skewing this particular stat.
Yeah. You mentioned the operating budget, okay? Jim, what's the biggest operating expense? Is it salaries and wages?
Salaries and wages.
So what are you going to do? Are you going to tell people they can't get a raise? You're going to lay people off?
That's not what I'm saying. And I'm also saying, you know, we need to take a harder look at this book. I mean, I'll give you an example. I didn't look through this in detail, but I flipped to the gas page. We budgeted $300,000 last year for gas. I think we spent $130,000. This year we took it down a little, but we way over budget on some of these items. And you know, we need to take a harder look at some of the items that are in here and compare them actual to budget and take squeeze that a little.
Well, that's what we'll be doing between now and the next meeting.
Yeah, I mean, department heads should be doing that.
But I want to stress, anytime you're looking at that, if you see something like that, Pat, and you say, hey, just cut that fuel line budget, then we just need to immediately cut the surplus revenue side. Because it's
for next year.
Those types
for next year.
For next year. So it's those type of lines that are generating surplus. So you can get a 1 year, but then that's it forever benefit. So the best way to look for savings is to not say just cut that line item, but look for less expensive fuel, look for more efficient vehicles.
But Jim, the amount of money we're
savings in services.
But the amount we've been spending on
provided.
fuel has been going down. I mean, it's not like it was static and we've kept the surplus there. That's actually been going down, but we haven't been cutting the budget accordingly.
Gas
If you
prices
go the last
are going
3
down.
years. Sorry?
Gas prices are going
I know, that's what I'm saying. It's
Ben and then Carmelo.
Yeah, I mean, this happens every year, right? We look at this and we wring our hands over how much tax increase we have to go for and whether or not electric rates are at the appropriate level. And it seems to me that we continue to focus on the wrong side of the ledger. I mean, we have to, if we're going to be serious about this, then the question is, okay, how do you reduce expenses, not for 1 year, but for the next whatever years? That it has to, it's not a one-time thing. So if you can save 80,000 in gasoline or something, that's wonderful. But that doesn't solve the problem. The problem will still be there because you'll still have $90,000 in added expenses for benefits, or you'll have some other number come in that doesn't happen for a year, but happens in perpetuity and just gloms on as another piece you have to cover. So I would, I mean, we can debate whether 1.5 is the right number or not, whether electric rates are appropriate or water rates are appropriate. I think it would be more productive if we had tangible recommendations as to actually how to reduce the cost of running this borough.
I concur.
I agree, but that's, to me, there's sort of two. One is what's the total we're spending, and two, how are we funding it? They're two separate items to some degree.
Yeah, but they're obviously closely related. And one is quite easy to talk about and even to deal with. That's the cheap one. The one that's serious and very hard to deal with, we don't talk a lot about. And for obvious reasons. I mean, there are constituencies for various services, and no one's going to say, I don't think we need X anymore, let's get rid of it. If anything, we hear complaints about the lack of services.
Carmela?
Yeah, that's one of the points that I want to bring up. I'm a firm believer, and this is a service-orientated business. That's what we deliver, taxes and whatever. I've sat on this council, and I've watched the council say to the various departments, you need to cut 5%. Next year it was 10%, another 5%. And the value of the $99,000 that is sitting in this budget, I think is extremely appropriate. One of the things that I did is I did look through every page of the Black Book. I'm sorry, Jim. That's why I have like lots of little yellow stuff here that we'll talk about. And as I went through this book, I also realized that we're also funding the Parks Committee, Madison, Historic Preservation Committee, Shade Tree, and whatever. And those are all very, very important factors in this town. So, I want to encourage you all to look through the Black Book. I mean, there was a couple of things. I'm going to make a nice itemized list. And I will agree what one situation is that sometimes you see that, there's a $300 item that's given, and that particular department never used any of that money within the last 2 or 3 years. Well, is it absolutely necessary? But when you look at the important parts of their operating budgets, to me, I mean, we stayed pretty flat in a lot of situations, and we have no control over the salaries and wages and the pensions. But I think we have to keep in mind that some of this stuff is absolutely necessary. We are offering a service to the people. Tom has, in the case of the 2 bucket trucks, listen, we have a wonderful reputation as far as the electric utility company department is, and that proved all through Sandy. So that's like an absolute necessity. I just wanted to put my input because I did look through this book, and I sat with with the fire department and the police department and talked about that, and we have some thoughts for our capital budgets, and I encourage each one of you to do that. with each one of your liaisons and listen to what needs to be done. But just bear in mind, this is service-orientated. And we've got to perform those services.
So a couple of, go ahead, Austria, and I'll throw in a couple
I was
of.
just going to say two things. One, to your comment about residents get hit in both places, but nonprofits who don't pay taxes do help contribute to, the operating budget through, their contribution to the electric utility and the water utility.
But who pays their bills? With the exception of Drew, we're still paying those bills also.
Because we're supporting
the nonprofits.
Our residents support the nonprofits who then pay the
Okay,
bills.
all right, you should look at it that way. The other thing, to Carmela's point, is that I think going through the future, we're going to have to think outside the box with respect to how do you cut these expenses in terms of efficiencies. I mean, things that we're loath to talk about, but, it may be necessary to do. Do we join with even more towns in some of the things that we offer in order to provide them more efficiently?
Rob, and then I'll get my.
So we're going to have we're going to do another one of these where we're going to talk about the individual budgets, right?
Correct,
Week,
yeah.
Yep.
Next week?
Yep. Next
Monday.
Monday.
Next Monday, yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm sorry, I just got a lot going on. But we do control salaries and wages. We do.
Yeah, that one we do.
absolutely control that. So we do control what we spend. That is all we control. Okay. And this is not sustainable. I mean, it is not sustainable long term. Jim, have you thought at all, and I would encourage you to do so, and, take my advice on this, but what happens if the legislature wins and all of a sudden the state has to start fully funding the pensions? I guarantee you the state aid is going to go to zero, and then what do we do? Right? I mean, this is the sort of stuff that is going to happen eventually, right? Or the social contract will break, and we need to have contingency plans. And I'm not suggesting we go and lay off. I mean, frankly, I was DPW liaison for a long time. I was fire, police. I think we're bare bones staff there. So I don't think we can cut heads, but we have to. We have to do. I have a couple ideas. I'll be happy to share it on Monday as to what we can do this year to significantly reduce spending. It's not an easy, happy thing to do, but these are the steps we're going to have to take because this is not sustainable. And I agree with what Bob said. We're in catch-up mode, but I don't know when we're ever going to get over that hill. If we're going to have to spend $42 million over the next 20 or 30 years, we're not over the hill for 20 or 30 years. So we have to make changes now. Okay, otherwise next year that number is going to be 45. Right, and like Pat said, and markets are mean reverting. That surplus will shrink one day,
So
and then we're in a lot of trouble. So that's all I'm going to say. I'm sorry for the lecture.
That's
I'm going to say to everyone, anyone that's hearing this, I'm going to encourage them to really look at this report. It talks about the cost drivers: 14% increase for general capital, 14% increase for sewage treatment. Those are significant increases. The rest of the budget only goes up by 2.6%. So those two numbers alone are driving it. Do I anticipate sewage treatment to go up again by 14% next year? No, I don't. Do I anticipate capital improvement to go up much at all next year? I told Pat, probably 3.5, probably 0% increase next year in capital improvement. So the trajectory they have here is absolutely not sustainable, and I think those two major cost drivers aren't going to be going up.
So my comments were going to be, but the fact that we have a unsustainable budget, I would disagree with that. Out of the 550 municipalities in the state of New Jersey, we're probably ranked in the top 5 as far as a well-planned out budgeting process. I've been here for many consecutive years going through this, and our budgeting process is even stronger with strategic planning. some of the things to keep in mind if we go through our book and shave off things, as has already been pointed out, start shaving down that 3.8 flowing into what's flowing into this year, cut that for next year, so it is a one-time thing. If this is 2008, I would be saying, let's go through this book. In 2016, it is not quite a rainy day yet, so it's not the time to really start nickel dime. The overall salary number has come down in the years I've been sitting up here, and we are from administration all the way down through DPW and and direct delivery of services, running a pretty lean ship. And we just heard from 2 department heads when asked for continuity planning for electric, they truly need another man. For keeping up with our water mains and all that, we need another man. So I don't see any miracles in there. And Jim just outlined where the challenges come from. You know, thankfully, in a way, we can't be like the state and say, well, $94,000, we're going to let a future council pay for that. We're not going to do it right now. No, we have to take that. That's a big number. The department operating expenses, we could shave off half of that and say we're only going to fund the brine and things that we know we've already spent, but we're shaving down and we're cutting into that next year's surplus probably. Capital improvement fund, we can say, all right, 3.5 is not fundable. I think we've already said the 3.5 number is probably what we need to do, and things are going well right now. This is probably the time to bite that bullet. Next year is probably looking better, and maybe Jim could come back with a little forecast to 317, as you're not going to see he's already said, the increase in the joint meeting. There's the 80,000 for the revaluation note. Is this our last year on that? Yep. So that's another. So we've got. So maybe if we have a future look, we can have a better decision-making process. So we're not throwing the old baby out in the pile of snow right now.
There's no snow left.
There's no. Yeah. Rob.
When I say it's unsustainable, I'm not saying it's because of our budgeting process. I think our budgeting process is thorough. What I'm saying is it's unsustainable because we have a giant electric utility surplus. That, over time, will go away. It's a matter of time. It's not if, it's when. That's why it's unsustainable, okay? And I'm not talking about, oh, look, we can save on a copier here and we should only buy, 2 bags of plastic cups instead of 3. No, that's not at all what I'm saying, right? We need to be bold, and I'll come back to you during the week with a couple ideas that I have. But, the reason I said this is unsustainable is because we are relying on variable revenue to fund fixed cost. And that is a recipe for disaster, no matter how you slice it.
Okay,
over the long term.
But and we did talk with, and this came out of strategic planning. Whatever it gets transferred for operating for capital needs to be sustainable in the best and worst of times.
And debt service.
Yeah. Ben?
Yeah, I just want to underscore that the strategic planning effort on the budget, we adopted our own little logo, which was a scale, and revenue and the appropriation side balanced out. And the only point I was trying to make earlier, and I'd like to reiterate it, is that we can get into the. It's kind of sexy to get into the side about how much people have to pay in terms of their taxes or their utilities. To me, it's a useless conversation unless you're focused on the other side. That scale has to balance. So if you take some of that revenue off, fine. But now you've got your scales unbalanced. So what are you going to do on the other side?
So going back to, because I think we have some more slides certainly related to this conversation, which we may want to get through before we go through. The one thing I do want to add to the budget is whenever we have a non-scheduled meeting, we spend some money for water. I'm dying up here.
I stole this from your car. You know,
Yeah.
I figured, you know.
You were wise to do
I
that.
grabbed on the way out. I was like, oh, really?
Yes. So anyway,
So in order to keep the meeting not going until after 10 p.m., I'll try to move a little quicker. Municipal revenues, municipal sources of revenues, those are fees, those are cell tower leases, those are shared service payments and alike. Right now, we're estimating them to come in flat for this year. State aid and grants, I think Mr. Catlin was 100% right. We certainly aren't going to see that number go up. So we're estimating that to be flat as well. We've talked a little bit about surplus. I don't think we need to go into it at too great a detail here, but I always like to include explanations of surplus in all the materials that I give out because I think it's something the residents don't fully understand in terms of what drives surplus and what it actually is. But surplus is good, and it represents wise financial management and is driven by a number of things, which are outlined on this slide here. There is an excellent discussion of surplus in the strategic planning report, and I actually have this link. So this is online now, this report. So if you go on there, you click on that link, you go right to Mr. Bintinger and Soriano and Powell's excellent document that talks about it right on page 26. So in terms of municipal surplus, in terms of what we're talking about here for the budget, it's just good to understand how they connect. And this is the municipal surplus on a yearly basis, the beginning balance, how much is taken out of surplus for the use of the municipal budget, how much is generated, and then the balance. And I just did this as an example to show how this surplus schedule ties directly to municipal surplus. This is a schedule that you received last year, and it has the $3,900,000 used in the municipal budget. And if you go right to the budget document that we're looking at today, for 2015, there's $3.9 million. So I just wanted to kind of show the connectivity between the municipal budget and municipal surplus. So with that, I'd like to move along to, as you all just got some water, I hope, to the water utility performance and the electric utility and their budgets. So water utility, as I said before, from an accounting standpoint, the water utility is a standalone entity, has its own capital budget, has its own operating budget. For 2015, it just surprised us as we were watching it. We watched it continue all year long. Consumption of water really increased. It didn't seem like a very hot summer. It didn't seem like a very dry summer, but it really was, because the beginning of the summer was wet, but then after that it was dry the rest of the year. And so we had estimates of about 2.4 million in water revenues or water collections, tariff collections. It came in at 2.8. That is significant. Can we count on that again next year? No, it's weather driven. So the estimate for 2016 for this year goes right back to 2.4. You take out from the tariffs cost of operations for running the utility, and then the capital, and you receive prior year appropriations. At the end of 2014, we closed our books, but there's still bills that could be paid, so we put that money aside throughout 2015. If there were little bills here and there that Tom or David needed to get paid that were encumbered in 2014, they get paid off. Finally, at the end of 2015, we take that residual amount, and that falls into surplus. So we generated much more surplus, $240,000 more in surplus this year than we anticipated. And that is great, because Robert and I were very concerned, because we're using $500,000 in surplus to our municipal budget, and we're only anticipating generating $420,000, unsustainable. So this year was great, and it actually it's going to end up beefing up our water utility surplus, 1.6 million. The problem that I see here is that if we go back to that $540,000 number and it's there, we'll end up being in an unsustainable waters. That's actually a slide ahead, so I'm not going to jump ahead of myself. But I'm going to jump right to that. Here's the amount of water utility surplus that's generated, that's put to the municipal budget. Just to tie it in, there's 500,000 right there. That again connects what Bob Landergan talked about right at the very beginning, the interconnectivity of the water and electric utility budgets and alike. Now, earlier on, remember I had the little blue arrow when Tom was up and showing his, and David and Bob were showing their capital spend. We had $540,000. Here's the $540,000 right there. Now, that's in the estimate. We have a couple $100,000 in water capital. So do we need to spend all $540,000 on capital improvement? Can we work with Tom on that number of 540? I think it's a pretty good number. But the challenge here is that if we go back to an estimate of 2.4 million, spending here, capital here, assume prior year appropriations, we're only going to generate 125,000 in surplus. 500,000 a year, and we're only generating that surplus balance is going to drain. That's not sustainable, so we're going to have to kind of work through that, and that may end up being that we do a combination of trying to cut back a little bit on the capital improvement and actually having to cut back on the amount that's given to the utility, from the utility to the municipal budget. Maybe we'll get lucky and maybe we'll just continue to sell water at $2.7 to $2.8 million a year. Maybe when the 100 additional residents are at Green Village Road, we'll get some additional revenue from there. But that's a big concern of mine, and I just wanted to point that out.
I've made this suggestion before, but we've got $1 million for meters. I would recommend that we start to look to move them in because I guarantee you the revenues will increase significantly.
Yeah, we've got to figure out what we're using and get moving on it.
I do want to take a look at, we replaced some meters, and I do want to take a look and see if they had any impact on our sales. As Tom said, he replaced
120 meters last year. I'd go look at those customers.
So, yeah.
I mean, you may not have enough to run. You might have to go to the previous years. But my personal experience is you will see a significant increase in your revenue.
The good thing, it's more dollars out of the pocket, as you're saying, Pat, but it's everybody's paying their fair share, which is the right thing to do.
Yeah, people should be paying for what they're using. So
Yeah, that's fair. And this way you don't have to raise the rates. It's just, and then again, to Bob's point, you can decide if you want to cut back on your water usage.
So shifting over to the electric utility, a hot and dry summer, not an epically hot 100-degree summer days, but it was warm. It was warm. And as a result, the revenues from the sale of our electricity was $500,000 more than we had anticipated. Robert and I had anticipated, and Ray had anticipated 22.3 million. It came in at 22.8. All in all, we ended up generating about $450,000 more in surplus. Still refining these numbers, and we'll know more when Matt and I do the annual financial statements. But we clearly generated more in electric than we had anticipated. For initial estimates here, I'm going right back to the 22.3, but we will, within a year and a half, have a significant number of new customers going online with the KRE site. So that's something we need to, I don't know if we can fully estimate it, but it's something to look at. We also have a couple of spaces like the Pfizer space that is currently empty. If that were to become rented, that's an immediate $500,000 a year in additional electric utility revenue. Were you going to say that? I'm sorry.
I have all the faith in the world that you can estimate precisely what we're going to do. Now, in addition to the customers that are coming on, we're also going to experience a cut in our procurement costs, yes?
Yeah. Yep.
Can you model that out maybe for us?
Yes. Yep. That's coming the next
Thank
time
you.
around. I want to work through that a little more.
Thank you.
All right.
Real rough it is shown here, 11.911, but I want to get more refined numbers for you. Okay. So how much of that electric surplus, this is a topic of discussion that's happened. Here is the amount of electric surplus that was used in 2015. Here it is in these schedules showing the interconnectivity between the performance of the electric utility and how it ties into our municipal budget. We have a significant increase in the amount of electric utility surplus that's happening here. So here's our estimates. I just indicated to Rob that we're estimating a significant drop in the cost of purchased power. However, here's that $895,000 number, right? That little blue arrow when Michael was up. But as we've talked about already, we have a significant amount of money in that. Maybe we can work on smoothing that out, as Ben said. Maybe we can reduce that $895,000 number to $700,000. That just falls right down to the bottom line. So this is an indication of how much surplus we're going to be generating versus how much surplus we're going to need. Right now, this budget is drawing $7.3 million in surplus out. That gets to the point of concern that I think you're all bringing up about the over-reliance on the electric utility. So
Is the 895 included in that 7.3?
That's $895.
$895,000.
The 895 being taken out before we even bottom line surplus number. So we're paying for the electric capital, 895, and then the rest of the money is going up to the municipal budget and paying for capital over there. So yes, it's included, I guess.
So it is included?
Yes. So strategic planning guidelines, I think these are really helpful and give us an indication now. I kept this one green here. Pat's right. It really probably shouldn't be green. We're $7,000 off, but green looks better. And it's only $7,000 out of a $3.8 million number. So maybe when the unaudited financials come in, we'll get it. But right now we're generating about 3.793 in surplus, and we're using 3.8 in the budget. So I put that down as green, but maybe I should have put it down as yellow. That guideline basically says we shouldn't, with our municipal surplus, spend more than we generate. Guideline 1B talks about the amount of prior year-end municipal surplus to total appropriations. We are at the higher end of that. We have a good amount of municipal surplus based on the strategic planning guidelines. Any CFO would tell you more surplus is better, but I understand there needs to be an upper limit. And right now we have that set at 25, so we're just breaching that, but we're actually heading in the right direction. It was 26.8 last year. We're dropping now to 25.7. So I put that in yellow. Operating revenues, the operating shortfall versus total appropriations that are funded by the utilities. Pat talked about that $1.6 million number over the $30 million budget. We're within that guideline. The strategic planning group, and actually you all voted on these via resolution to adopt these guidelines, so they're your guidelines as well. We're within that guideline. The utility transfer, we're not. This is where we take the utility transfer for both the water and electric utility and add it together and say how much is that? How much are we taking out of the utilities to fund the operating budget? It's capital, debt, operating. And right now we're taking $7.8 million out of the $30 million, and that's a concern. That's above the higher end of the limit. There have been other years. I think Ray and I were talking. What was it, 34% one year? Where so there've been plenty of other years where we've done more. But from a sustainability standpoint, I'm sympathetic to what Mr. Calanella says about the sustainability of that. Debt service. As a proportion of total appropriations. I didn't include the $80,000 because it's kind of a special emergency note. It's a 5-year note. Really what happens is the state of New Jersey allows you to say, these are expenses you're going to have. We just don't know exactly when they're going to happen, so you can spread them out over 5 years. So it's really like an operating expense that gets paid out over 5 years. But that we could put the $80,000 in there or not, but it wasn't last year, so it's not this year. So it's 7.7. So our debt is definitely below the guideline of 10%. And then the capital funding, and this to me is really the big long-term number that I think we need to come with, is how much in capital do we need to spend? The Strategic Planning Committee said you should really spend at least 10% of your total appropriations. So total appropriations are $30 million. You should earmark $3 million of that for the capital improvement fund. In this budget, I have $3.5 million going to the capital improvement fund, so we're actually above and at least 10% in that line there. So that kind of gives you a summary of the guidelines. more information online about the guidelines, and I gave you all copies of that. Are there any questions on the guidelines? So the good news and the bad news, we're coming around the clubhouse turn here and wrapping it up. Good news, as Ben and Mayor Conley pointed out, $80,000 in the emergency note payment is it's our last year for paying. As a matter of fact, we already paid it. So we paid it earlier a few weeks ago, and so we're done paying that. That emergency note, as a reminder, was 5 years to pay for the revaluation. If there were other kind of big expenses that municipalities have to incur every once in a while, codification of ordinances, redrawing of tax maps and things like that, you can use these special emergency notes, spread that cost out over 5 years. What other good news is coming down the pipe? The pilot payment for GVR, payment in lieu of tax. Important to note that when that property goes online, it will be the second highest payment or property tax paying entity in the borough. It will be more than any other building other than the Pfizer building, in terms of how much the borough receives. And because we're receiving a much larger percent of it than we do with normal property taxes, it's even that much more significant. I'm talking about total dollars that are received to the borough versus property taxes. The other buildings over in Giralda, and they're big buildings over there, right, are not paying as much as what we anticipate the GVR project will pay to us in pilot. We're also going to see a significant increase in construction permit and GVR-related income, which could really inflate that municipal surplus even more. So we talked about generating 3.793 and only using 3.8. I would be comfortable potentially increasing that number, knowing that there's a significant amount of other surplus coming down the line. The good news, I think, in this budget is that there is a lot more spending in capital. And I think we need to spend more. Personally, I think we need to spend more in capital, and this is getting us to a higher number. There's a lot of aging infrastructure in our town, pipes that are 80 years old or older, culverts and storm drains that are older as well. GVR residents, I alluded to this before, will become new electric and water customers, so we'll have more revenue there. And I also alluded to this earlier. You could think of this as good news because capital, sewage, and pension expenses are increasing. Those are outside that levy cap. So that's giving the council flexibility, which is good if you want it, to go above 2% tax increase if you wanted to. I'm not advocating for that, but you have the flexibility. So you know what will happen is that will be banked. So if we don't use it this year, it'll be banked. It only banks for a couple of years, so it's kind of a use it or lose it, but we don't have to use it this year, and we'll still be able to have it for next year if we wanted to. So, and then we'll go to the challenges.
Hey, Jim, can you stop for 1 second on the good news? So we're not really expecting the pilot payments to kick in for at least another year?
Yeah, I say 2000, good news is 2017 and beyond. So some of it is this year, some of it is next year.
And when that, are we going to be able the first year to really budget that as revenue, or are we just going to have to take it as unanticipated revenue and then it'll become surplus the following year? Okay,
well,
so really,
it's
really talking like 2018. And then the other thing is the construction permit and GVR. That we're pretty sure that's going to come in again as unanticipated revenue this year, which will be available the following year. Okay.
It'll fall right to municipal surplus and be available following year. Yes.
It'd be really good, especially when these come online, that we kind of specifically identify them, because I think when we were ages ago talking about the pilot payment from GVR, I think the hope was that it would be dedicated to capital. So I'd like to try to make sure that that additional revenue goes there. In terms of the construction permit, I'd also hope, if it's a fairly significant bump for 1 year, again, if we're going to have a big number for next year, we look at using it there rather than trying to pump up the operating budget, because that money's not going to be there in the following year.
So you would say so if we got $800,000 in a construction fees and another hundreds of thousands of dollars in sewage and water connection fees, that those fees next year will fall to surplus, and you could say we're going to take them as a loan and put them in capital. It's kind of a one-time thing. Yeah, we'll fund capital that way, which allows you to take that annual feed to the capital improvement fund and reduce it. That's a good idea.
Makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
Ben?
Thank you. I had 2 points. One is these various positive factors led you to say, or the good news, led you to say that you could see the surplus going higher, right? Can you give us a sense of how high you think it may go?
I really don't know. It depends. For next year, I can't say because I don't know when construction permit fees are going to occur, when payments are going to be made for connection fees and alike. But it's 100%, Pat's right that it's a one-time. So I think we think of surplus, we want to think of what we can sustainably use as surplus to fund operating, which is probably in that $4 million, $3.8 to $4 million range. But if we get these big one-time hits from these fees, I think it's wise to, as Mr. Catalano was saying earlier on, reserve it, encumber it, put it in the capital improvement fund, and make sure it doesn't end up being spent on operating.
Well, to the extent structure counts, I mean, when we formulated these guidelines, we said that the municipal surplus to total appropriation should be in that 20 to 25% window. Anything over and above it should go to capital. We're slightly above it this year. From what you're saying, we may well be slightly more above it next year, and the pressure to do that increases.
Yeah, I think it just makes sense.
Just one very minor, maybe nitpicking thing going forward as we try to get to that 50% threshold for property tax of overall appropriations is the pilot payment, I would say, should be counted in that ratio because it's generated by property. So we're not, so we should look at that and see how that will, when that pilot is fully operational, where does that put us?
That's a great idea. Yeah. Challenges. We've talked about most of them. The sewage processing costs being a challenge to estimate. I think you all are going to be meeting with our representatives from Chatham. Wish you well. Good job. Hopefully you and Mr. Cody will be able to navigate those waters. We talked about the amount of $4.2 million in average general capital over 5 years, not really being able to be funded currently unless we do what Pat said, which is sweep a lot of this surplus that'll be generated next year to capital, and unless we use all of that $1.56 million. But I'm still going to encourage you all to work with the department heads next Monday night on those capital figures and see if you can, as Ben said, smooth them out, and I'm going to use the word stretch them out. I talked about the water utility not being sustainable with the current capital needs and rate structure. That's a concern. We're going to have to revisit that at the next at the council meeting, February 22nd. I'll be getting you information after the annual financial statements are out, revised information on that. Our over-reliance on the electric utility, we've talked about that. One thing we haven't mentioned is all the collective bargaining agreements are coming due at the end of 2017. So when we talk about challenges 2017 and beyond, just know that right now, we know what our salary expenses are going to be for the most part this year and next year. Come 2018, we're going to be negotiating with all of the collective bargaining units.
Rob?
Would the water utility be sustainable if we did not transfer $500,000 to the operating budget? To the
Absolutely. Yep. If you drop the $500,000 down, if sales are up, it would be sustainable. If we had the same number of sales last year, but we can't count.
If we go back to the long-term mean of 2.4 million,
yep.
At what transfer rate from the water utility to the municipal budget would it be sustainable? So we're doing 500 now. So if you say, oh well, if we do 300, it's sustainable. If we do 200, it's sustainable.
Depends what the number of capital is.
Pardon me?
Depends what you're spending on capital in that utility.
So it's going to be, Pat's exactly right. It's going to be capital, and but I think 300 range for now is
You're talking about water utility capital or
yes,
general
the amount of
capital?
that we are going to give out of the water utility operating for water capital, which we had is what, 570,000? Are we sticking with those numbers? And if we are, that impacts it. If we're able to kind of work those numbers down. So
it's 570 to
540.
540.
Sorry. Yep. So, but remember, we had $100,000 as, I'm going to use it as a Bob Vogel plug number that we had in there for Hatch-Mott repairs. So, again, I think we need to work with all of the department heads on capital and finding what that right number is.
No, I don't want to cut water capital. So, I'm sorry, I'll take it offline. I don't want to hold it up.
You can look at it, you can tell how much there is, so you have to split between capital improvement in the utility and how much you can transfer. Pull up the revenue, subtract the overhead, and whatever's left is what you have to choose where you want to spend it.
And keep in mind, with the water utility, sustainability is far different than electric utility. We're not paying for the water, we're not purchasing it, and,
yeah.
we're well below the market rate structure in neighboring in the state.
My question is this, so, and again, I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses, it was a long day. So for original 2015 estimate of 500,000, that was less utilized in municipal budget, right?
For water, yep,
That's not the capital spend.
correct.
So that's the number I'm focusing on. Like,
Yeah.
I
Yep.
trust these guys. They say we need X number to keep the stuff running. We don't want to be Flint, Michigan at all. That's the number so if it's not sustainable at 500. Is it sustainable at 300? Is it for, use the municipal sources? That's the answer I was looking for.
Okay. I think it's sustainable right now at 300. And we've got enough surplus in there now that it gives us enough years that if for some reason it's not sustainable or it's overly sustainable, that we can take 400 out, we can start making adjustments in out years. Questions on budget stuff? I'm just going to really quick because I know everybody's pooped.
Yep.
Electric procurement, I gave you the document, just take a look at it. I'm happy to answer questions offline just so everyone that's here knows. I've worked with the members of the Public Power Association of New Jersey and the Public Power Association of New Jersey attorney, Jill Barker, to craft budget electric procurement guidelines. There is some information there. I used a little bit of what Mr. Catalanello had developed 3 years ago. And the purpose of this procurement model is to manage the risk and offer guidelines for purchases. And I just read those 2 lines there. This is, council sees this regularly when I give you information on it, but just so it's on TV and for the people that are here, this is the way all investor-owned utilities in New Jersey purchase electricity. They all have to buy through the BGS, Basic Generation Service Auction, that's offered by the Board of Public Utility for New Jersey. They buy 1/3 of their need for 3 years. So for 2016-17 delivery of the year, it's 3 contracts. One that was bought February 14, one that's bought February 15, one that will be bought actually later on this month. So that's the way they do it. In the past, we have bought a contract out for 5 years. The investor-owned utilities don't go out that far, right? They're only going out about 3 years. So this is what our current portfolio looks like. We are a little bit long. If you look at it, we're a little bit long here and here, but we've made some excellent recent purchases. This 3320 that we made in December, 3302 that we made in December, and 35 are all superb purchases that we've made. The point is, and I think Austria feels this way, I know I love the graphic look of trying to understand the portfolio. Here's the investor-owned utilities. Here's what I think is the shortest we can go. And I saw Mr. Calanello grimace. He might not even want to go that short. He might want to at least stay that long. And here's potentially the longest we can go. I leave this with you as kind of a discussion point as to how comfortable you feel going out beyond what the investor-owned utilities go out. If you came back to me and said, no way, Jim, we don't want to do that block. No way, Jim, I'm fine with that. But this gives you this gives you kind of a graphical reference to what all those guidelines talk about. There are other things in there as well, creditworthiness, diversity of when we purchase, and diversity from how many contracts we have. We don't want to have 3, Exelon is green, right? We don't have 3 contracts in 1 year from Exelon. So when we bid this one out, Ray and I were hoping, geez, I hope it's not Exelon. It turned out Exelon came in with the lowest rate, and we had these guidelines. We could say, based on our guidelines, we can't accept your offer, and we go to the next highest. We're always looking to diversify. You can see we're getting delivery from 4 different counterparties. That's it. I think the rest of those comments and conversations on procurement can happen offline and don't need to happen now, can happen in the months ahead. Other
Thank you. Well done.
comments?
Any other questions or comments? And so we've got some work between now and then next week we'll be listening to the various departments. And at this point, I will open the podium to anyone in the audience wishing to comment on what you've seen or anything. Michael, come on up.
Mike Soriano, 230 Woodland Road. I think Jim did a tremendous job, along with the folks from the departments, engineering, water, electric, in putting this together. There's a lot of great data here, and I think that there's a lot of trade-offs that the council can make, and that's what your job is to do. But I think you've got the data that's been put here to make those trade-offs. I think at a prior council meeting, I think, Bob, you asked the question to Ray, and Ray said there was something like $950,000 in construction fees coming from Green Village Road.
Water, sewage hookup fees, I think they were.
And permit. Whichever the fees were, it seemed like it was felt to be a pretty firm number. I think we're taking the conservative view of seeing that come up in surplus for the following year. But the numbers are going to be there, whether we use it this year or whether we use it next year. But one of the things as part of the strategic planning process that we said is that we ought to take a look out, let's say, 3 years, 16, 17, 18. I know that they're, guesses, best guesses, whatever you want to call them, but maybe with a lot of this Green Village Road pilot fees, with the connection fees and everything else, it might be a good exercise to take a look at what the next 3 years look like. Because I think as much capital for the borough, for electric and water, that as a council you can sock away for the rainy day that's going to come. I agree with Rob that someday the prices are going to turn around in the electric market. But, one of the things I think this council could do is sock some money away for future capital expenses. But I think you'll be helped with the process if you take at least a 3-year outlook and see some of the things that are happening. I think this looks really good in terms of the preparation.
Thank you, Mike. And Jim, just to add to your homework assignment, I think that's a very good point because you heard some of the concern before about the non-leveling of capital expenditures. So if we can see some of that, we don't know exactly when it's coming in, but we know it's a high probability. So if all that went to capital, what can that do to the future years where we could soften the near future? Anyone else wishing to comment or questions? Seeing none, I close this part of the meeting.
With that, I move we adjourn.
Thank you all. This is very productive.
The results out of Iowa? Iowa, any results?
Here, let me guess.
Yes, we do.
I'm going to play Karnak.
Our attorney was eloquent as usual.
Trump and Clinton. Right.
Oh, I don't know. I can't.
I think it's Cruz and Hillary.
Oh, is the end?
Yeah. No. This Iowa.
Adios.
Oh, Iowa.
Good, thanks. How about you?
Such a wild card.
Huh?
I know.
Yeah, it was. We had
Last night it said.